And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution is not going to get that man today. No, because I'm going to get him.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the special Monday, March 4th, 2013 edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. My name is Joe Hagmann. With me is my co-host, Doug Hagmann. We are both in studio and ready to go.
Welcome, Joe. Welcome to the studio. How's my sound, by the way?
You're okay.
Sound all right? All right, good. Well, thanks for opening up. I was trying to find the correct button here on the switchboard, but
it doesn't help when I forget to bring you on either.
Yeah, that's true. But nonetheless, we're together, folks. We got a lot of news information to get through tonight. I just want to open up by saying that I think one of the most important, in my view, one of the most important aspects of news today, something that is not getting a lot of play, or if it is, it's getting improper play. We're not getting the whole story, of course, is our very precarious financial situation. I've been doing a lot of research, of course, for the second part of the series of who is responsible for the economic demise, our economic demise. I've got so much information. If you thought it was bad before, if you thought that the numbers were bad, if you thought that, for example, U6 unemployment was bad at whatever number was given. I don't recall specifically what U6 employment, what the latest U6 employment number was. I think it was at 16. You know what? The U6 unemployment figure, I think, was at 16.9%, which is not, which is a method of how the government was calculating unemployment back before they changed the numbers, but that is much higher. I think it was at 10.5%. Or no, in July of 2008 was 10.5%. Now, by the same statistics, it would be closer to 17%, if not higher. And then by different standards, it would be well over 25%, 24%, which would be just like Greece. Now, that, of course, tells me that aside from being lied to about unemployment, we're being lied to about everything, including how we got here. And I think how we got here is important to identify, so we can also identify how we got here, who brought us here, and what we need to know. And sometimes I was talking to a very good friend, intelligence contact, right before the show. Sometimes you just have to know enough so you can get out of the way of what's coming. That's a method of survival. So that's important, very important. But a lot of news to go over. Joe's prepared some headlines. Joe, why don't you go through the headlines, which you've prepared in other areas?
We have a lot to get into today. First, locust alert in Middle East as plague descends on Egypt and creates panic in Israel. A swarm is estimated to be made up of 30 million insects. The infestation has been devastating crops in Egypt ahead of Passover. And this article goes on to say a swarm of estimated 30 million insects has been devastating crops in Egypt, fueling apocalyptic fears because of the infestation's proximity to the Bible story of the Passover, in which a swarm of locusts, the 8th of 10 plagues, is imposed on Egyptians by God for enslaving and abusing ancient Hebrews. That is one story we're going to hit on. On the economic news, we have the federal revenue for 2013 is set to set a new record. The latest budget and economic update, the CBO forecast of federal revenue will top $2.7 trillion in 2013, higher than the $2.6 trillion the government collected in 2007, and also lots of other economic news today. Chart of the day. China's 3.3 trillion reserves could buy all the world's gold twice. And this should be concerning to a lot of people. Also, the Fed is starting to prepare for a future public relations nightmare because of their years of quantitative easing program. That also we have China fully prepared for currency war. Also, drones. More in Africa will track gun owners and cell phone users inside the U.S. And we have the Department of Homeland Security has moved on, evolving from its purchase of bullets to now purchasing 2,700 light armored tanks. Obama, DHS purchases 2,700 light armored tanks to go with their 1.6 billion bullet stockpile. According to one estimate, since last year, the DHS has stockpiled more than 1.6 billion bullets, but some of those numbers differ, up to 2 billion in some cases. Now, the DHS has purchased 2,700 mine-resistant armored protected vehicles, MRAPs. The Modern Survival blog reported that the DHS, through the U.S. Army Forces Command, recently retrofitted 2,717 of these mine-resistant protected vehicles for service on the streets of the United States.
Well, and one would ask, I've had a lot of people send me emails and say, well, what's this really for? What's the DHS preparing for? A lot of questions about the current events. And if you take any one of these events, of course, it's startling, like the Department of Homeland Security's actions, very startling in terms of what they're buying. Part of this, I believe, and based on research, is with respect to the ammunition, is taking the ammunition out of the market. So to deprive us of that ammunition. Now, what about the stuff that's out there already? Of course, there's ammunition in the hands of millions upon millions of people here in the United States. So at least we have that. But their current behavior would, in my view, and in other informed individuals, is, of course, if you connect all of these dots, you can see where this is going. They're preparing for conflict here domestically. Now, is it a foreign enemy? No. It's an internal enemy. It's us that they're preparing for. Well, why would it be us? Would it be just for the sake of causing or engaging in some sort of constraining the population? No, it's going to be directly related to our economic crisis. And by the way, we're talking about a situation, an economic situation. You're not going to there's no place for you to go. And I've also gotten emails from people saying, well, geez, what about, how does Panama sound? Or what about Costa Rica? Or what about Uruguay? Folks, you're not going to be able to run from this. This is a global economic crisis. Well, I wouldn't even say that. This is an orchestrated an orchestrated takedown of our global economy, and you will not be able to go anywhere.
Folks, sorry about that. We that was actually a problem at the production level, and not a problem. But just to pick up where I left off, ladies and gentlemen, we are not going to. There's no place to run from what is about to take place. We are going to be involved, or we are going to witness the we are going to witness perhaps the most life-changing, not perhaps, we're going to witness the most life-changing event in history, and that is the entire collapse of the global economy. Now, that is where we are headed. There are people in power right this very moment that know what's going to be taking place. And,
we're back up.
Okay, we're back up. This is fantastic. So, Joe, go ahead and, if you don't mind, go ahead and let me get my thoughts together here, because that just kind of really screwed my flow up. And go ahead and then pick up where you were you were taking us here. Because all these dots connect, by the way. All these dots connect to this global incident, this black swan event that's going to take place here across the globe, and everyone is going to be involved in it. If people think that this is some sort of conspiracy, nutsy theory, wait until it happens. So we have to be prepared for it, and in some cases we just have to get out of the way of it for our salvation or our safety and to live another day. But Joe, you're getting into some other headlines as well. We're going to get into this a little bit deeper as the program does unfold. But you were getting into some other headlines. Go ahead and take that while I reconfigure with a headset here.
The two eras of financial globalization, a flashing red warning. This from Zero Hedge. The rise of cross-border investing in recent decades is not the first time the world has seen a significant burst of financial globalization. Indeed, the second industrial revolution coincided with a new era of capital mobility that extended roughly from 1860 to 1915. Foreign investment assets rose 55% of GDP, and this wave of financial globalization reflected European investment in colonies and former colonies. It goes on to say, but the ending of the first stage of the financial globalization provides a cautionary tale. Two world wars, a global depression, not only brought on this period of interrogation to halt, but also usher in 6 decades of tightly restricted capital flows and pegged foreign exchange rates. Foreign investment assets, a share of GDP in the major economies, did not regain their earlier peak until 1990. Today it is unclear whether financial globalization will rebound or whether we will enter a similar period of more unstable financial markets. So what they show is the GDP, the global foreign investment assets versus GDP, and the correlation to the time of the depressions and till now, and the wars till now. And it's on Zero Hedge, the two eras of the financial globalization. Check that out. Also, back to the drones. I mentioned that the DHS now has sanctioned the Street Sweeper. It is a Navistar Defense, navistardefense.com, a division within the Navistar organization who built these. The Navistar umbrella are several other companies, including International Trucks, IC Bus, who make school buses, Monaco RV, recreational vehicles, Workhorse, MaxForce, and Navistar Financial are among some of the people who are providing these vehicles to the Department of Homeland Security now. DHS drones equipped to eavesdrop on Americans. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security already has an arsenal of drones to be deployed for whatever the agency deems fit, but the actual capabilities of those vehicles exceed what many Americans may expect, and we could have told you that. And also on drones here, I don't hear you.
That's okay. There we go. The drones, look, the drones are being used all across America. That they are conducting surveillance on Americans, obviously. And as we said before, when it was first coming out, where the drones, they're going to dispatch 30,000 drones, for example. Look, those drones are already out there.
Yeah.
And the drone, what is being made public, of course, is not even close to what's going on in camera, in private.
Right. This report, drones, more in Africa, will track gun owners' cell phones in U.S. And it goes on to say the specifications were revealed in a document sent by DHS to General Dynamics, the manufacturer of the drones, and obtained by the Electronic Privacy Information Center, and CNET. CNET reports its unredacted copy of the DHS purchase order instructs General Dynamics to build drones that shall be capable of identifying a standing human being at night as likely armed or not. DHS also demands that the signal interception technology can capture communications in the frequency ranges used by mobile phones and direction-finding technology that can identify the locations of mobile devices or two-way radios, according to the documents obtained. Also, on February 22nd, Obama sent a letter to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate, informing them that the U.S. ordered armed forces sent to Niger, where they will be provide support for intelligence collection, and will also facilitate intelligence sharing with French forces conducting operations in Mali and with other partners across the region. And it goes on to say that, remember we talked about the U.S. building a brand new drone base in Africa a couple weeks ago. Well, this report from the New American that covered that, the New York Times report, says that the Pentagon planned to build a new drone base in Northwest Africa and able to keep a closer eye on African organizations believed to be associated with Al-Qaeda. Now, how is it that we are fighting a war against Al-Qaeda when Al-Qaeda is being used to support our U.S. and other Western government interests? Not only has it supplied billions of dollars of aid for weapons to Egypt, $60 million in aid just recently given to Egypt or to Syrian rebels, along with $55 extra million in that package, making it $115 million overall package. Now we have this coming out of the government from today, and I'm looking for the clip here. It's very short. Here it is.
In Egypt today, Secretary of State John Kerry met with President Morsi, pledging to provide $250 million in economic aid if Morsi goes ahead with negotiations over economic reforms. The meeting occurred as pro- and anti-Morsi supporters clashed in Cairo and Port Said.
$250 million. Another $250 million going from the United States taxpayer money to the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood run government.
Right.
And I do have an audio to play whenever you want to get to it that talks about the U.S. government. This is from Russia Today. The title is U.S. Government Deluded That It Can Control the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's very interesting. It gets into these figures, and it gets into how the U.S. is really getting in over their heads, thinking that they can do something that isn't attainable.
We'll go ahead and play that one right now, because this is going to dovetail into some other things that we're going to be talking about. So go ahead and play that.
Okay.
Now to talk more on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and North Africa and why it is causing concern, I'm joined now live by F. William Engdahl, geopolitical analyst and author of Myths, Lies, and Oil Wars. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, why have Kerry's calls for a political consensus in Egypt been greeted with protest? Is this not in everyone's interest to end the turmoil and the unrest?
Well, Kerry's going to Egypt with an empty bag. He's demanding that Egypt's government, the Morsi government, sign on to the IMF conditionalities, which mean huge subsidy cuts, as you just pointed out, and also big tax increases that are going to worsen the economic situation, not improve it. Furthermore, the entire Muslim Brotherhood project that the Obama administration has backed since the kickoff of the Arab Spring that toppled Mubarak, the Muslim Brotherhood project is spinning out of control. It has no popular base within the Egyptian society other than the 12% or so hardcore members of the Brotherhood, and most Egyptians want some kind of a democratic society, and this is why the opposition has boycotted meeting with Kerry on this trip around. Washington has a very poor bag of cards to play in Egypt right now, and that's what's being reflected in his reception, I think.
Now, you mentioned that Egyptians want a democratic society. Speaking about that, why is America appearing to side with what the opposition are calling a hardline authoritarian Muslim government after its vocal support for democratic change in the region?
Well, that's a very good question. I think there's a double-faced policy in Washington. The backing of the Muslim Brotherhood goes back to the CIA's role in Egypt back in the 1950s when they saw the Muslim Brotherhood as a potentially useful tool to put in their bag of organizations that they manipulate around the world. And then they brought the Brotherhood into Saudi Arabia in the 50s when it was banned in Egypt. And from there, the Brotherhood is expanded out. Now they're playing a key role in all of the countries of the Arab Spring. I think some people around President Obama have the delusion that they could control what's basically a political Islamo-fascist movement. It's not a movement for democracy in any stretch of the imagination. And that's what this brotherhood is. It's a secret society. They have a public agenda that sounds lovely, and they have a private agenda that we're seeing unfold now in Egypt with the dictatorial authoritarian measures that Morsi and company are advocating. So I think at this point, Morsi is in a life and death struggle because the popular support is not there for this coup, and Washington is beginning to get a little bit wobbly on its support for Morsi for that reason. They're beginning to rethink, I think, and that's one of the reasons for the change between Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, to bring in a new cast of people and see what kind of options there are in Egypt at this point.
Now, kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit, how does this alleged U.S. support for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt match up with years of an alliance with Israel?
Well, this is a rabbit hole, but I think some people in Israel probably think that they can control elements of the Muslim Brotherhood, although I think increasingly Israel is becoming very leery of this whole Brotherhood option and feel more comfortable with a military dictatorship such as we had under Mubarak, maybe with a civilian face. But I think that's what is gradually going to evolve in the region, for better or for worse. But the victims of this, of course, are going to be the Egyptian people and the people in the entire region.
All right. Certainly interesting to have your thoughts on this. F. William Engdahl, geopolitical analyst and author of Myths, Lies, and Oil Wars. Thanks for being with us.
There you go.
I think people really need kind of a little reminder or a primer. Folks, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928. It's a militant pro-Sharia law organization that has used both violent and non-violent means to achieve its ultimate goal of restoring the Muslim caliphate in the glory of the Islamic Empire. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood's all about.
Now, could we be seeing part 2 of this? The war-weary Taliban forming political party. Did you see this?
Well, yes. I mean, this was always their goal. I mean, somewhat two separate things, but okay. We can sift this into this conversation about the war-weary Taliban. Well, go ahead. Let's talk about that.
Well, this article from today just states that the Taliban are considering a political solution to the decade-long conflict they have been engaged in. Said a senior Taliban official that they are becoming war-weary. We must launch a political movement to achieve the goals for which we have made so many sacrifices. The Taliban leaders, whose names have been removed from the UN blacklist, will play an important role in the political process. That from Mullah Mu'tazim, a close conflict with a militant group, elusive leader Mullah Omar, and the founder head of the Taliban Political Commission, told the Pakistani newspaper The Express Tribune. However, he added that the warring faction was a vital part of the Taliban. And they go on to say that the Taliban has as much or more influence than Karzai does in Afghanistan. Whether true or not, this is what RT is reporting. And that by 2014, with the withdrawal of the U.S. troops, the Taliban is looking to form their own political party.
Well, okay, and I think it's important for people to understand this about the Taliban. The Taliban has been around for quite some time. The Bush administration, their involvement with Enron, okay, remember that whole Enron deal? Enron executives entered the White House like a half a dozen times in 2001. It was a big dust-up with the energy situation. They met with Dick Cheney before the collapse of Enron itself. But even more troublesome was the president, vice president, back before Bush was in office as president. Think about this, folks. The Telegraph reported this, I think it was back in 1997. Oil barons court the Taliban in Texas. The Taliban was about to sign a multi-billion-dollar contract. Now, this is 4 years before 9/11 with an American oil company to build a pipeline across Afghanistan. Okay. Now the Taliban, these Islamic warriors, if you will, they were persuaded to close the deal of allowing this pipeline through Afghanistan, but they were done so through this old-fashioned Texas hospitality. Now picture this. Picture these Islamic garbed men sitting at a good old-fashioned Texas barbecue pit in 1997 or 1997, and there was another another visit a year prior. Now, of course, at that time, and you have to go back and look at history. Bin Laden was rather persona non grata. Bin Laden had been expelled by Sudan back in early 1996 because of our pressure and UN sanctions. Of course, remember back then, Osama bin Laden had declared war against the United States in August of 1996. The bombings in Riyadh were connected to this as well, and Khobar. Remember the Khobar towers in Saudi Arabia killing, I think, 19 U.S. servicemen. He praised that, and of course, but all of this is connected. All of this goes back, and people have a tendency to blame Obama about this. Now, what Obama has done is I just want to say what Bush did, he greased the skids for Obama, but what Obama has done is exponentially increase the Taliban, the Muslim Brotherhoods, their influence on domestic and foreign policy. So a pan-Islamic state or caliphate recreation is being created across the southern portion of Europe, North Africa, and Europe. Yep. But we can't. And when we're looking at this, it's so important to really understand what was going on back in the mid 90s with respect to the Taliban and oil, and this will explain why after 9/11, why what happened, why did we go into Afghanistan, for example, or why are we still there? Perhaps is the more relevant question. And how does this relate to what's going on today? It has to do with oil.
Yeah, we funded the Taliban before 9/11. We funded them right before 9/11. We funded them after 9/11, and we're funding them now. The Taliban, Al Qaeda, etc. They're being used as a tool to overthrow nations. The U.S. is giving them nations, right? And it is not for peaceful purposes. It is to establish the enemies around Israel, not their enemies that were there in 5 years ago, because it was more or less, I should say, radical. They have made sure they have put radical chess pieces on their grand chessboard of nations that surround Israel, and that's not by accident.
Of course not. We have to understand too. I think it's important because you brought this up earlier about the Muslim Brotherhood, their influence, the hidden agenda here. The Islamic component to all of this it's extremely important, but it's important for one reason. And folks, please really understand this part of it, because this is kind of what threw me a little bit. It made me think, okay, well, how is all of this possible, and how does this relate? Look, the Islamic component to this is, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States, who they're attempting to create this Sharia law that coexists with our codified laws. It's not going to work, but it does soften the system. And this is what they're attempting to do, is they're attempting to break down our legal system here in the United States via the Muslim Brotherhood, via the pro-Sharia law. And now people would say, there might be people that say, well, where's your proof for that, or how do you know that? In 2004, federal investigators discovered a Muslim Brotherhood memorandum in a house in Northern Virginia. The memorandum was written by Muhammad Akram for the Muslim Brotherhood's Shura Council. Now, this memorandum described a civilization jihad aimed at the United States. In fact, all of North America. And it said essentially that there is going to be a jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within. So what the globalists are doing, and when I say globalists, I'm talking about anybody, I don't care if it's Obama, Bush, Clinton, they are using the Muslim Brotherhood as a tool for that purpose, to destroy us from within. It's a no single point failure plan, because they're hitting us with our civilization. I mean, morally and in the very fabric of our society. They're hitting our laws. They're attempting to criminalize any type of criticism of Islam, which that won't stop at Islam. I mean, that's going to have a severe impact on the criminalization of, all kinds of speech, including but not limited to any type of anti-government speech or speech against the current regime that's in office.
We're seeing this in China right now, and we reported on the Saudi Arabian crackdown on Christians. Well, today I came across an article, China's churches face renewed government persecution. And the Chinese government has increased its effort to eradicate the country's growing underground church movement, a Chinese watchdog group said in a report to China Aid, which continues to monitor instances of governmental persecution of the church in China. Reported a 42% increase in government harassment of Christians in an unauthorized places of worship from 2011 to 2012. In his study, the Texas-based group headed by former Chinese house church pastor Bob Fu documented 132 cases of government persecution involving 4,919 persons in 2012, and noted a 125% jump in the number of people arrested and sentenced for involvement in unauthorized Christian worship. Unauthorized Christian worship.
Okay, so picture this, folks. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood, represented, by the way, by a number of different organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood, the front organizations include the Council on American Islamic Relations, FCNA, ICNA, the Institute of Islamic Thought, ISNA, the Muslim Students Association, MPAC, NAIF, I can go on and on. There's just a number of front organizations. Well, what they're attempting to do here inside the United States for their benefit is to, much like China is going against the Christians, they're going against any type of religious bigotry against Islam. So, in an effort to change laws. Now, I'm trying to make the comparison here between China and the United States. It's just a different set of players, but it's the same purpose.
Look, this is interesting how they're going about shutting down the churches. There is a system where they are detaining church leaders and sending them to labor camps.
In China.
In China.
Okay.
And they go on to say, instead of using law enforcement officials directly to attack churches, the last year they have used a softer approach. Utility companies, service companies, and neighboring communities are being used to terminate contracts with rental facilities and cut off electricity and water. Right. Places where Christian worship is taking place or suspected to be taking place.
So what do we see taking place here inside the United States?
Right. Instead of the SWAT team kicking down the door, they just cut off your ability to have lights and heat. And
it's also using, for example, using utility companies, using utility workers, using other assets to achieve their goals. And this
see something, say something.
Very much so.
Tell on your neighbor against neighbor.
But see, now in the United States, that might be a little bit too overt for the normal person or too obvious. So what they're doing is using willfully, and Obama in particular, Bush in general, but Obama in particular is using the organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood in an effort, number one, to change the laws inside the United States, but also the Muslim Brotherhood is very effective at reporting, for example, through the Council on American Islamic Relations. Think of the ACLU. They're very effective in reporting things that would be considered, well, anti-Islamic or Islamophobic, we'll say. So what happens is they'll change the law, and it will apply to, or they'll change the law where you cannot criticize Islam, but, for example, Christianity is fair game. It's open season on Christianity. What's this all about, and why is this important? It's important because it's going to, well, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was going to say, what the most interesting thing in all this is? It seems like the places where the Christians are being persecuted are the places where the Christian population is growing the most. That's Saudi Arabia, Africa, China.
That's very interesting. So it's almost as if there is a...
Kind of like the early church.
Yeah, very much. Well, okay, so what we're seeing, though, is this, and I think we can't lose sight of this, or we shouldn't lose sight of this, is this push toward a one-world religion. So if by attacking the big three, for example, you cannot, by criminalizing speech against Islam here in America, that's a goal of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's setting up the animosity against. I'm trying to really condense this, but if all three religions cannot get along, then they're going to have to, or the most logical thing to do is create a diluted version of all three, and then make that the unofficial official religion of the country. I don't know if you follow me on this, but that's the ultimate goal. Now, we're covering a lot of ground there in that statement, but that's what they're attempting to do. And this will work out even better, too. It's interesting because there was a New York Times reporter, I don't have the note in front of me here, the same reporter that was talking about making the $1 trillion coin, remember that?
Yeah.
Talking about
a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, well, that same reporter or that same journalist floated out the story of an alien invasion or an alien threat to make us believe, the people in the United States or the people in the West believe, that there is a different religion that would combine Judaism and Christianity and Islam. So there's a conditioning process going on, and I know that seems so far-fetched.
Muslim Patrol?
But, I guess.
I don't know if you guys have seen, go on YouTube and look up Muslim Patrol. That's spreading across the UK. And now there's been an actual protest by the citizens there against that.
But see, all of this is taking place at the very same time that personal income in the United States
experienced all-time low.
Yeah, largest decline in 20 years. It decreased by 500, I think $505 or $506 billion in January. It's just incredible. The unemployment rate in Italy, for example, had risen to almost 12%. Now, that was a huge jump in 1 month, and it's the highest that they have had in 21 years. So what we're seeing here is a global economic meltdown, not just in the United States or not just in any of the European Union, but a global economic meltdown. The Eurozone, as a matter of fact, the unemployment rate in the Eurozone as a whole just hit a brand new record high of almost 12%. Those are the admitted government numbers now. I do suspect that they're higher if you would use the same measuring barometer type device that you used years ago. So we're looking at all of this take place all at one time. But the biggest thing that people really have to understand is the economic aspect of what's taking place. That, to me, I'm really focused on that.
That's the most important for us right now.
Right.
Aside from what we can't see going on, that we know is going on, the clamping down the final stages of the global currency, the New World Order, but the crashing of our economy has a lot to do with that. And they're really pushing towards this goal right now, but there is a lot of distractions out there from what is really important. And I don't think we're seeing what's really important in the mainstream news or really the alternative news. And I think some of that's because people don't know. The discernment is not there.
Well, look, when you've got report after report, for example, of DHS buying up weapons and ammunition, of course they want to take the ammunition out of circulation. But how do you discern? For example, how do you look at this? Do you look at the fact that these are like 5 bullets for every man, woman, and child in America? Do you look at that as an offensive move, or are they getting prepared for some sort of offensive deal, or are they just taking it out of circulation, or is it a combination of both? Once again, it's a matter of discernment. But we are one. As I said before, we're one Mideast crisis from disaster, and everyone is in denial, or most people, I should say, are in denial. And we are beyond treatment. We are beyond any type of treatment for this. We cannot walk this back. We will be facing the moment of the truth. And as I said before too, I think it was on Friday, that we don't have any time for lies. Now is the time to prepare for what's coming. And we have to do it while there still is time. And this is so important. And I think I used. I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but I just want to really, really push the fact that what we're seeing or what we're experiencing are psychopaths mm-hmm. in power. That we are seeing the Cloward Piven strategy with respect to our economy on steroids, the Keynesian or Keynesian, however you want to pronounce that theory of economics in play. We are seeing an unprecedented printing of money, and I'm not saying the actual printing presses, but just merely putting an extra zero or an extra few zeros on a computer screen to make more money. If you and I did that, folks, we would be in jail for counterfeiting. And in fact, if you and I engaged in what's taking place, which is nothing more than a huge Ponzi scheme, Bernie Madoff is serving time right now for that, I believe. I think he's still in jail for that. If you and I engaged in that activity, we would be incarcerated, yet it's okay for the psychopaths in power, the Ben Bernankes and Obama, to do this. And we are going to have, at some point, this Ponzi scheme has to stop. It has to end. And once again, people, I had to call a good friend of mine today, investigator and very close to what's going on, and say, look, explain this to me one more time, because I'm having some trouble understanding the end game part of this, the exactly how this is being brought out, because I was thinking, wouldn't it be good that if we could just kind of push a button and have this thing just, if we're engaged in a Ponzi scheme right now, economically, if we are the victims of a Ponzi scheme, if we are selling our children into slavery or having our children sold into slavery, wouldn't it be good for the whole system just to collapse right now and get it over with? And that sounds like a logical, or at least it sounded to me like a logical question, until he said, well, wait a minute, do you understand that there will be people dying and families dying and starving?
In mass.
In mass, correct. But he said 2 words that really hit home with me, roll over, or 3 words, or however, debt rollover. So in other words, when the pieces, when the bottom does fall out and everything collapses, well, that debt is going to be rolled over into a new currency. It is not going to absolve our alleged fraudulent responsibility to pay the debt. So we are going to be still indebted, but in a different currency or through a different basket of currencies or in a different Ponzi. The Ponzi game is just going to be expanded. Instead of the Federal Reserve in America, it's going to involve a global currency, and the Ponzi scheme will continue. I don't know if that made sense to you, Joe, because I've been looking at numbers all day, and I was trying to figure out. And the other thing too, money. What's money? What does money represent? Well, money is really a proxy for man hours. So if we would take our debt, what we are the debt we're saddled with, there's no way. There's not enough man hours for us or our children to pay that debt off, or our grandchildren. So essentially, these psychopaths in power from the current regime through the last 100 years have sold our children into bondage. Because if you understand what money represents, that's the man hours, the work, the toil of our toil.
Yeah, your labor.
Right. So think about that. Think about it in those terms, and then I think that it will come. The realization will be there. And how can we allow that to happen? How can we sit back and allow this to happen? And it's to me, it's incredible, because it's all fraudulent. It is fraudulent.
It is fraudulent. Moving on to another piece of news here. California.
Yeah, this is important for a number of reasons, although you might not think it is. But
California smoking ban would prohibit people from smoking inside their own homes.
Now, at what point, folks, does a citizen of a state or of a city, municipality, county, at what point are you going to allow?
Well, I don't know if it's up to you to allow. Going back to the drone story, it talks about how these drones are not only launched to see, vast areas, but also that they are now using specific constant surveillance methods, recording and monitoring electronic communications inside and outside of your home with different devices. And this is a huge violation of the Fourth Amendment. And they go on to say that they can have direct targeting of a person to see if they are armed or not, either in night or in day. I was listening to Bloomberg News on the way here. They have these new LED light bulbs, which we were talking about, which can hook. You can buy a pack of these 3 LED light bulbs that hook into your wireless router and hook up to an iPhone app, so they can control the light. You can control how light your lighting is, but it's a two-way street. As
of course it is.
Yeah. But this California banning smokers from smoking in their home, this is a bill that has been introduced by one Golden State Democrat. It would be the first state to prohibit millions of citizens from smoking inside their own homes. The bill, authorized by Assemblyman Mark Levin, would prohibit smoking inside all multi-unit residents, such as condos, apartments, where housing units share walls, floors, ceilings, or ventilation systems. Freestanding homes, which make up about 2/3 of all residents in the state, would be exempt from the ban. That's what they say here.
Well, think about the enforcement aspect of that, too.
Yeah, in your house.
Well, yeah, but at what point?
A monetary penalty. You might light candles in your house, and say you rent for a place for a year, and you light candles. Well, your lease is up and you're moved out, and they say, well, looks like there was smoke in here, or even cooking. You can, create enough smoke and a few times of burning something to change the color of a wall a little bit. So the discretion, one, and then following that by the landlords, and what about them notifying the police if they feel you're smoking. Do the police have the right to then come in your house and inspect your house to see if you're smoking in your house?
Well, once again, the enforcement aspect of this, are you going to, you're right, can we afford to have, what the cigarette police or the cigar police or the pipe police? I don't think we can. And then the rights aspect of this, it doesn't matter whether you think smoking is good or bad. That has nothing to do with anything. It's the fact that this is regulating an activity inside your own home that is perfectly legal. Smoking is legal. Cigarettes are legal. So this is regulating an activity inside your home. Mm-hmm. And so you are giving up under the, it's for the children, or it's for your good health. You are giving up what? You're giving up rights. And also, you're also kind of stepping into an area where there's going to be a question as to how this can be verified, and of course the fourth, the protection of freedoms of your property. So there's a lot of things with this, and yet people, rational, sensible people, will look at this and say, secondhand smoke's bad, so we really should. It's really a good law. Secondhand smoke is bad, especially if there's kids. Oh my goodness! And in fact, I think wasn't there a mention in here in the article about children? I think there was, because children can't speak for themselves. They can't get out of the way of secondhand smoke. So
unless they're consenting to vaccine inoculation.
Well, of course.
See, they can take deciding if they can and are responsible enough, no matter what age, as long as they're in school, to consent to vaccinations without the consent of their parents. Then what's the difference?
Or in later time, use of condoms or abortions or whatever. Of course, it's a twisted, progressive illness, mental illness.
We do it for the children,
right?
At the same time, the biggest killers of all the children.
Well, yeah, and that's a problem. But Joe, I'll tell you something. That I looked at the news this morning. I was up at very early this morning. I was checking the news at 3 in the morning, and I checked it again at 5. And folks, by the way, I did not put anything up on the Northeast Intelligence Network website. Our home base, folks, is HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. It has not been updated in the last couple of days, except for a couple of navigational aids I hope will help people. For example, at the top of the page, very clearly marked, click here to listen live to our program. And if you want the show archives, click here. I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. I really don't.
Our archives are also on iTunes. There's
right.
URL, podcast URL. If you hit the RSS feed on the main Blog Talk page, Blog Talk archives are also on BTR. You can get an app for any phone that has podcast capabilities.
Yeah, and I've gotten a couple of emails from people saying, well, your site's very impossible to navigate. Like I said, I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. But the reason I mention this is because when I was up this morning looking at the news, there's so much news that's flooding the, and I think it's almost an intentional. And I'm not sure how you folks feel about this. Is the amount of news that we're getting right now? Is this just the nature of the beast because it's just a heavy news period, or is it?
No.
Is it an intentional flooding?
Intentional all the way. It is.
For what purpose, though? What's the end game?
Distraction. We can't. It's hard to discern the important news from the news there could be 10 huge stories of what the DHS has done that seem to be like they are ready to launch war on us. Yet one story, small story, on the global economy or the what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East or an election in the Middle East, which is needed to be focused on the most, yet everybody's focusing on these other stories with catchy headlines and, like the 2,700 DHS tanks today we covered.
Right.
Is this important? Yes.
Of course it is.
Is it important enough that we should spend our time on this instead of spiritual matters and matters that pertain to the imminent future, when this might, but as far as the 2,700 mine-resistant armored vehicles that DHS just purchased, but we've seen the drones, we've seen the bullets being bought, we've seen the training take place. What haven't we seen? We haven't seen gun confiscations. We haven't seen implementation of any of these martial law plans. We see the Fed pumping money. We see the buying up of the mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds with that money. Right. We're seeing what? Silver and precious metal prices still dropping, the stock market still rising. So this thing, you asked earlier, cutting off the Fed. If we cut off the Federal Reserve completely right now, you phrase it differently.
Right, but I get where you're going with this. Go on.
The collapse of the dollar will not come about unless they are knowing it's coming about, controlling the situation as it happens, and already have the outcome rolling. If that were to happen when they were unprepared, the Federal Reserve and the international bankers and the global elite.
Oh, it wouldn't happen if they were unprepared, because the economic collapse is being orchestrated by the very people who are running the show, running the Ponzi scheme. Exactly.
So what we have to do is keep an eye on what the Fed is doing. And when I see articles like this, the Federal Reserve is starting to prepare for a future public relations nightmare, and how it's going to unwind the $3 trillion balance sheet amassed from the years of quantitative easing. It goes on to say Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke's testimony was a hot topic before Congress last week. One of the big issues the central bank faces is the inevitable loss it will have to take when the interest rates rise and the value of the Fed's bond portfolio declines.
Okay, right there, and this is good because this goes to the core of what we're talking about. Remember the sequestration stuff. Remember back, it seems like 100 years ago when
sequestration's over. Executive action by Barack Obama on March 1st, sequestration order for fiscal year 2013, pursuant to Section 251A of the Balanced Budget Emergency Deficit Control Act. By the authority invested in the thief and commander of America, he hereby order resources in each non-exempt budget account be reduced by the amount calculated by the Office of Management and Budget in its report to Congress on March 1st, 2013.
Right.
Budgetary resources subject to sequestration shall be new budgetary authority, unobligated balances of defense function accounts carried over from prior fiscal years, and also this is in accordance with all of the other executive orders and fiat laws created. Barack Obama, the White House.
So what does that mean?
They're just slowing it down. They're passing the buck.
That's right. That's exactly right. See, here's the key. 100 years ago, Romney and Ryan, everyone heralded them as, well, they could fix the debt, or they could handle the debt. And of course, Palin came out and said some things about the
bullets, civil unrest.
Yeah, but see, here is the thing. Everyone is talking about the economy, about budget cuts, or about spending cuts. There are no spending cuts. Here's what you have to understand. There are no spending cuts. There is a decrease in the rate of increase in spending.
And printing money.
No. Let me say this again. There are no spending cuts.
Oh, yeah.
There's just a decrease in the rate of increase in spending. So, in other words...
And also an increase in raising revenue through taxes and other governmental mechanisms.
Exactly. Folks, we're at the top of the first hour of this Monday, March 4th, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me in studio is Joe Hagmann, and together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Once again, we're at the top of the hour. This is a live broadcast today. We're going to take a commercial break for our sponsors.
Yep.
And on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking more
on the locust.
Well, there's a few things, but it all revolves around the money changers.
Yeah. We're going to get in. We have a food stamp report on the other side, too. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi folks, Doug Hagmann here. You might know me as the co-host from the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, or as a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. If you're like me, you're tired and confused over today's headlines. You just don't know where to turn for accurate, concise information about really what's going on, what's truly going on in today's society. If you don't know where to turn for accurate, well-researched, and properly vetted news, I've got a suggestion. In fact, it's a requirement. Bookmark Canada Free Press. That's canadafreepress.com on the internet. It's just not for Canada. It's for news across the world. Judy McLeod, founding editor, has put together a vast array of talented writers like Kelly O'Connell, Daniel Greenfield, Dr. Eileen Johnson-Powell, a lot of guest columnists, very talented writers. Folks, that's Canada Free Press at canadafreepress.com. Now mobile friendly. Follow on Facebook, because without America, there is no free world.
Survival of the fittest. In any and all situations, survival is your number one priority. That requires being tough and thinking smart. And the folks at Freeze Dry Guy are going to help you do just that. They have the long-range patrol ration entrees, what they call the Brick Pack. When you're in survival mode, it is absolutely the best item for your survival pack or bug-out bag. You can go farther, faster, and carry more food with the LRP cold weather ration entrees. Not only do these long-lasting, durable entrees help sustain you or your family through the harshest environment or situation, they are by far the most delicious of their kind. No contest. With a variety of tasty entrees, you can't beat the LRP Brick Packs. Let Freeze Dry Guy help you in your survival situations. Go to freezedryguy.com. That's freezedryguy.com. Or call 866-404-3663. That's 866-404-FOOD.
You better wake up fast and listen to this, America. The Obama campaign has launched attack squads disguised as truth teams dedicated to intimidating and silencing all political dissent carried over the internet that criticizes the Marxist Obama. Truth squads specifically focused on covering up Obama's endless trail of lies, corruption, and subversion, and using the Gestapo power of our own government to police and censor the internet and shut down websites that dare to carry the real truth about Obama's Marxist coup. Remember the names of these Gestapo-style agencies at work right there in your neighborhood: KeepingHisWord.com, KeepingGOPHonest.com, and AttackWatch.com. KGB, SS, and Gestapo-style police-state gangster organizations at work to silence the important voices of patriot dissent, some of which have already been shut down by Obama's orders. Adolf Hitler would have been proud. We're the 21st century Tea Party patriots.
Hold on to your seats. The Hagmann and Hagmann flight is now taking off. Doug and Joe Hagmann have cleared the runway of TSA agents, jihadists, political crackpots, and global elitists. Now get ready for some real news. Here they are, Doug and Joe Hagmann.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this March 4th, 2013 edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. This is Joe Hagmann, along with my co-host, Doug Hagmann, and we've been through a lot of news in the first hour, and we're going to continue here in the second hour. I want to start with this audio. This is talking on the
This is an important. Yeah, this is an important bit of audio, folks. Listen carefully to this.
The food stamp use in the United States has hit record levels.
Since President Obama took office, the country has seen the largest rise of people on food stamps ever.
Well, everybody uses them out here in D.C. because we all out here struggling.
An estimated 47 million people now depend on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program to put food on the table. That's 1 in 5 adults and larger than the population of Spain.
A lot of people don't have the support that they have or have good jobs, or the baby fathers not around to support the kids. So they have to go out, it means they have to get public assistance. They have to feed their children. Here's what they call an EBT.
Since 2008, food stamp use has spiked over 50%, and so have instances of fraud and abuse. One example of food stamp fraud, selling your card for cash. And Washington, D.C. has one of the highest percentages of recipients applying for 4 or more cards. So once a person claims that they lost a card, they go to an office like the one across the street and apply for a new one.
My baby.
Abusing food stamps angers people like Tina, who has health problems that make getting a job difficult.
Why? Your food stamps are selling when like people like me that really need food and stuff survive.
As the largest program in the USDA, food stamp benefits cost a record $78 billion in 2011 alone. Critics worry that as the food stamp program expands, it creates more opportunity for fraud.
As the program gets larger and more people participate, there are certainly more opportunities for fraudulent behavior.
The spike in food stamp use is due in part to the ailing economy. But the real reason for growth, critics say, is due to eligibility.
More people are eligible now than they were prior to 2009, and that has accounted for a great deal of the increase in the number of people now eligible for food stamps. It has not been because of the economy.
For now, the number of people that are on food stamps is only expected to grow. But some that depend on the program have hope that better economic times are ahead.
I'm not a politician, but I can tell you this, that I think that Obama going to make it greater for us, you know what I'm saying?
In Washington, Liz Wall, RT.
Well, that was pretty. That last comment was pretty.
And what you didn't hear was the video after that. This was a 2-part video. I decided not to upload the second part because it was people like that.
Yeah.
And then there were people that were asked who were not on welfare if they mind that their tax dollars are being used or misused, not because of the welfare program, but because of the lack of regulations and enforcement of fraud in the welfare program. And the people are like, no, it's okay.
See, fraud is an issue.
You can go to RT YouTube for that other video.
Yeah, if you want, if you can stand it, if you can stomach it. I suppose if you, instead of watching a rerun of Mr. Ed, you can go to that. But look, here is what is taking place, because that's an important audio. That was an important thing to play, because here's what's going on. This is, once again, Cloward Piven strategy. Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky. We've got Obama, the community organizer. Look, folks, let me just really quickly go over this real quick here, okay? Cloward Piven, when you talk with your neighbors and your friends, and they're not believing what's taking place, or they're saying, well, look, the stock market is up, and even better, the metal prices are down, which would logically mean there's more confidence in our paper money. Everything is fine. Well, okay. By playing that clip, by telling your friends and neighbors who are disagreeable with you, for example, that the system is working, and or by having them tell you that the system is working because this is a safety net for people that cannot afford or have been hurt by the recession, which is now, the economy is now in recovery, is based upon what you're seeing in the stock market, which, by the way, is just smoke and mirrors. You can just say this is Cloward Piven strategy. It was introduced to the United States back in 1966. It was, and you better know this, because once again, we have to know where all this is coming from. Richard Cloward and Frances Fox Piven, husband and wife, professors at Columbia University in New York City. Now, Piven, both actually wrote an article entitled "The Weight of the Poor: A Strategy to End Poverty." They advocated an increased enrollment in social welfare programs to collapse the system and force reforms leading to a guaranteed annual income. This political strategy has been referred to as the Cloward Piven strategy. So when you hear that, understand what that means. Now you know what it means. Okay? It was actually inspired, and I just want to give this bit of history before we get back to the news. This was inspired in it was by the August 1965 riots in Watts, the Watts district of Los Angeles. Those people who were alive or were adults back then or remember this, remember the Watts riots. They began when police had used their nightclubs to subdue a black guy suspected of drunk driving, much like the Rodney King affair, except not as bad. Well, I mean, it's bad, but nonetheless, in '66, when their article, The Weight of the Poor, a strategy to end poverty, came out, they asserted that the ruling class, that the people at the top, were using welfare to weaken the poor. Now think about this. Cloward and Piven said that the ruling class were using welfare to weaken the poor, that by providing a social safety net, the rich doused the fires of rebellion. Does that make sense to you? Poor people can advance only when the rest of society is afraid of them. Now that's some pretty twisted logic, but effective. The New York Times, September 27th, 1970. That's what appeared in the New York Times, by the way, to talk about what took place in the 60s. Rather than placating the poor with government handouts, this according to Cloward and Piven, activists should work to sabotage and destroy the welfare system. The collapse of the welfare state would then ignite a political and financial crisis that would rock the nation. Poor people would rise up in revolt, and then the rest of the society, and only then the rest of society, would accept their demands. See, the key to this whole thing, to sparking this rebellion, would be to expose the inadequacy of the welfare state. Do you folks get it? I know you do. I know you do. See, this is all Marxism. This is all progressivism. This is textbook Marxism. So, anyway.
Something we've been seeing in our nation for a while. I want to hit on two other subjects here. One, there is a storm brewing coming up on the northeast, a snowstorm, with hurricane force winds and a very, very center of low pressure.
You know what we should do? We should name this storm. You and I are the listeners of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report should name this storm.
I haven't checked if they had a name, but let me pull up the Weather Service and see if they did name it yet. But they are talking about a nor'easter in the 6th and 7th coming up and hitting the East Coast now.
Well, not only the East Coast, it's supposed to go
right
from the East Coast. Where about the Carolinas area?
Winter Storm Saturn.
Unreal. Okay. Now we'll talk about that maybe later today or later in the show or tomorrow.
I can tell you what Saturn means.
Well, yeah, but this storm is actually going to create like a swath from the East Coast right up into Chicago. I mean, it's going to be a very remarkable storm, and they're already talking about this setting records and breaking records, actually.
It's amazing, the ability to predict the weather, such catastrophic weather in the future when, a couple of years ago they couldn't get it right if it was going to snow in your area during the day or not.
And folks, are you old enough to remember this, ladies and gentlemen? Remember when your local news used chalkboards for the temperature? And they used the magnets or the chalkboards. I remember the chalkboards specifically. And then they graduated to the stickers for the sun and the clouds and such. But remember that I remember this like the chalkboards. Everybody had a chalkboard in the weather. They had the temperature on there, and at least when I watched it, it wasn't necessarily. It was green. It was a green chalkboard. But it wasn't necessarily wiped off really well, and it was just fun to think back and to think back at it. But this, it's almost as if someone's guiding the weather. But we can't talk about that, of course. Weather manipulation is not.
Even though they admit it, we can't talk about it.
No, of course.
It's crazy.
It'd be too conspiratorial. And which brings me, by the way, speaking of modifying or manipulating the weather, I just wanted to add something too. I had no idea, and I don't know if you folks have, and we're working on getting the. I have not been in touch with Pete Santilli or Dr. Judy Wood, but we're going to put last Tuesday's program into a YouTube video so we can so you can see the frames that they were talking about and go through it at your leisure. But the weather on September 11th, 2001, during those attacks, the Hurricane Aaron, I had no idea that there was a hurricane in the area. And the book about the I don't know how you'd even put this. The chapter in the book is called the Tesla Hurricane Correlation, and it's interesting because it seriously, when you look at the charts and look at the path of the hurricane heading for ground zero, I mean directly for ground zero, we're talking like a Hurricane Sandy type of an event, directly for New York City, and then having it inexplicably take a hard right turn off of the East Coast at the last moment when the outer bar or the outer reaches of that hurricane were just touching the east part of Long Island. It was unbelievable. And the discussion in this book, the book entitled "Where Did the Towers Go?" Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11, again by Dr. Judy Wood. It's just an amazing compilation of information about the manipulation or potential manipulation. She makes a very good case. If you were in a court of law listening to this evidence, and if it was anything other than weather manipulation perhaps, or even if it was, depending on your open-mindedness, I got to tell you, it's a very compelling case that the weather was manipulated on that day.
Well, to the Weather Channel, what they say here about Winter Storm Saturn, Midwest and Eastern mess. Winter Storm will first lay down a heavy swath of snow from Montana through the Ohio Valley. And Monday night, they say the Northern Plains, Upper Mississippi Valley, heaviest snow will be in the Twin Cities and Minnesota. And it could affect I-94, I-29, I-35, and I-90 in those areas. Tuesday, the snow ends in the Northern Plains, continues the Upper Mississippi Valley, spreading through the Ohio Valley and Western Great Lakes and into the Appalachians Tuesday night.
All right, let's be clear about this, Joe. When? Because there's a...
This is tomorrow, or today, Monday night.
All right, so has it hit ground yet?
Well, okay, I guess this wasn't a nor'easter, and I should look at the weather map before I go through these. But, yeah, it looks like tonight. Yeah, winds tonight.
All right.
And then tomorrow, they say huge possible commute delays in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, Milwaukee, Columbus, including I-94, I-90 from Minnesota to Ohio, I-80 from Ohio to Louisiana. Is that right?
And that's a whole lot of ground there that's coming.
Yeah, in Chicago they're calling for a foot of snow and more. And Winter Storm Saturn then sweeps into the east starting Wednesday. So there is a lot to watch with this storm. And why are they naming the storms and why are the names so weird and ominous? I don't know. But this other story, because there's people in chat talking about this and I wanted to hit this.
Sure.
You guys obviously in chat, as I see, have heard about the sinkhole in Florida that swallowed a man.
You know, yeah, I was on...
There are new pictures today of this sinkhole.
I contacted the sheriff's department for information about this and got absolutely nowhere, which I'm usually able to get some level of or some amount of information. Being an investigator, having some mutual friends in areas, I'm usually able to get something.
Okay.
I got nothing about this.
All right, well, let me find this other report. But a sinkhole swallowed a Florida man alive in his bed the other day, and there is now another sinkhole in Florida. There's two huge sinkholes. All right, another sinkhole opens up in Florida. There's still a sinkhole in Louisiana. There's some in Pennsylvania. But this new sinkhole, 2 miles away from where the man that was swallowed up lived, and he was in his bedroom in his bed. There's a second sinkhole opening up in Cessna. Authorities investigate hole 2 miles from where a man was swallowed by a sinkhole. And authorities are investigating another possible sinkhole in neighboring Sneffner, just 2 miles. As I said, this is Hillsborough County Fire Rescue Code Enforcement are at a home on Cedar Tree Lane to determine if it's safe for a family to stay home. The sinkhole is reportedly estimated to be about 10 feet across, straddling across a fence and affecting at least 2 properties. There are no structural damage to the houses as of yet. The second possible sinkhole comes the same day workers demolished the blue one-story home to try to salvage belongings for the family of the victim of Jeff Bush. A 20-foot wide opening of the sinkhole was almost covered by the house, and rescuers said there were no signs of life since the hole had opened. So
that was the Earth. Bush, that was Jeff Bush. No relation.
The Earth opening up and swallowing people now. And it's been opening up in different places. The sinkholes are increasing. This is a story that is severely undercovered as Ohio had 400-foot sinkhole that wrecked a highway.
Right.
Remember that about a month ago? I'm sure somebody has compiled.
Was that Ohio or Michigan?
It was Ohio. I'm sure, and also in Pennsylvania, near the Scranton area, there was a big sinkhole. There has to be somewhere that somebody's compiled a list of sinkholes over the last year, and I'll try to find that because there's just something way too crazy going on with the sinkholes, the new. It's not new reporting of the sinkholes. It is the new increase of these massive sinkholes. And these aren't small. We're talking football field-sized sinkholes.
Right. 4
football field-sized sinkholes in some cases. But to swallow somebody up in their bed as they sleep, okay?
Okay, combine that with look
at this. And I know
the sinkhole is one thing. No, that's all right. I
want you to see this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the bottomless pit. In the middle of a neighborhood.
If you're familiar with the Art Bell Bell's Hole ordeal back in the 1990s, but so once again, winters of freakish storms. We've had it before. I think the last storm like this in March was in 1962. But to name it Saturn, which is interesting in and of itself because Saturn, of course, has some interesting connotations about it.
Yes, it does. And I did not find what I was looking for, but that's okay.
But yeah, we don't really have to get into it other than to say that Saturn has some, shall we say, some meaning to the if you are inclined to believe in the Illuminati, as I am, whether people believe it or not, they do exist, or these elite groups exist, and once again, it's not important what we believe. What's important is what they believe. The ancient name of Saturn, I think it was El. Actually, it's the reason why. One of the reasons for the word elites. But you can also from that get the elders and the elevated ones and so on. But anyway, rather than going into that Elohim and such, rather than going into that, we'll just stick with the other. But when you get the sinkholes, you get the locusts, you get the weird weather patterns, you get all of this combined together.
It's
Obama going to the Jerusalem or Israel.
Yeah, the Pope stepping down and hit lightning at St. Peter's Square the same night. Locusts engulfing Egypt to a point where it's destroying all their crops and agriculture. And Israel is worried about this. And
do you think we should be paying attention to this?
I think there's signs. I think that there. And let me. I got a good quote today. Out of Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and where it says, whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, And a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on in these chapters to talk about what a wise man is and what wise really means, the difference between the wise and the foolish. And it says in chapter 12, verse 13, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. But as you said, wisdom. Wisdom is something that is important, spiritual knowledge, more so than wisdom, I would call it, because wisdom can have a bad connotation to it. Wisdom is not always good and righteous, and especially the non-godly people, the wise, the scientists, the evolutionists, the Satanists, the New Agers, that wisdom is awful wisdom, if you would call it wisdom. But they do refer to in the Bible, in the Old Testament and New Testament, as far as wisdom is concerned, that it is both. It is a double-edged sword. Depending on what wisdom. Yes. It also says that more wisdom, more knowledge brings more sorrow.
Oh boy, I'll second that. I
read it and listened to Ecclesiastics today, and I got to tell you, there's so much in this one book. It's short, very short book, and it talks about things you were talking about labor.
Right.
It talks about. It says wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them who have it. But, yeah, is there something to look for? Is this important to be watching? Yes.
Absolutely.
As the earth is opening up holes, swallowing people alive, causing things to happen along the New Madrid fault line, causing unknown shakes, noises, sounds, I believe, are also associated with these sinkholes, earth changes, fish die-offs, these earthquakes that are very shallow, that seem to be created rather than natural. And people who know about earthquakes know what I'm talking about. A lot of earthquakes, especially bigger ones, have a deeper or semi-deep point of origin, where we're seeing 8.0 earthquakes, under 10 feet or 10 meters or 20 meters, something like that. And the stars, if you read in Genesis, and the sun and the moon were created first and foremost, if I'm not mistaken, for the signs and the seasons and for light. But it mentions the signs and the seasons. And so when we see, as the parable of the fig tree says, the tree not bringing forth its fruit at the appointed time, or it bringing forth its fruit at a time not appointed for it to, the season is off. And when the earth is bringing forth things we have not seen, when the earth is increasing in these things, that's a sign.
Right. Exactly. Well,
back to some economic news. It's China, fully prepared for currency war. A top Chinese banker said Beijing is fully prepared for a currency war, as he urged the world to abide by a consensus reached by the G20 to avert confrontation, the state media reported Sunday. Yi Gang, deputy governor of China's central bank, issued the call after a G20 finance ministers last month moved to calm fears of a looming war on the currency markets at a meeting in Moscow. Those fears have been largely fueled by recent steep decline in the Japanese yen. I wonder where we heard that. Also, it says China is fully prepared in terms of both monetary policies and other mechanism agreements. China will take into full account the quantitative easing policies implemented by central banks of foreign countries. And what did we hear today? That China's power and reserve currency could buy all the gold in the world twice over. They are the new global currency power, just as Henry Kissinger predicted, just as Brzezinski predicted and helped design.
Absolutely. But what is the percentage? I mean, China is on the short list of nations that the United States owes money to, or the Fed, if you will, owes money to, but primarily, we're buying our own debt. But China is in a position, China is in a position to really to do some damage to us economically,
as they have been for a while, and setting up to do so. Remember the Ron Paul commercial he ran during his campaign, showing a Chinese classroom, and they were doing a history of the U.S., saying, the U.S. was one of the greatest global superpowers ever to be come to power in such a quick time.
Right, I do remember that.
And remember the ridicule that he got from all the mainstream news sources, both left and right, communist, Nazism, and that was true. And not only is it true, they would, with one side of their mouth, denounce Ron Paul on his commercial. With the other side, they would say, yes, China is the new rising. The rise of the dragon.
It's my understanding that China owes 1.17 trillion, or China holds 1.17 trillion of our debt.
So China owes what? China's getting things.
Followed by Japan at 1.2 trillion, and then the oil-producing nations at, I believe it's like 260 some billion. But so in total, roughly about $5.5 trillion is owed to foreign nations. It's my understanding. Yet,
that's it.
Well, but the rest is being laid on to the American people. Now, our debt, by the way, for the first, and people, I know people have heard this before, but it's worth repeating. For the first of 42 presidents, our debt, we ran up $5.7 trillion in debt, and then the 8 years of George W. Bush, $4.9 trillion in debt, bringing it up to, no, that's wrong. My figures are wrong. I'm sorry.
And don't forget, George Bush also doubled the size of the
last two
welfare program.
Bush and Obama.
George Bush in his 8 years doubled the amount of people who were on welfare.
Right.
Term. Obama has done the same in his short term.
But Obama has done it in a short period of time, of course. What took Bush 8 years to do, that's what I was trying to say, what took him 8 years to do.
And somebody said this in chat, and this is something we've been saying, maybe not in this way, but in a different way, that the governments are not trying to create solutions. They're not getting together, meeting to create solutions. This is a collapse by design, and we have stated that many times. The governments are here planning on how to profit from these collapses, and how to help the international bankers, the global New World Order crowd, understand what or how they will profit from a financial collapse. Remember Soros in 2010 having a great crisis.
Right. Well, when you've got Q eternity, and everyone has to understand that what we're seeing in this economic collapse is a macro-systemic dynamic, if you will. It's economic treason by the leaders of the United States. It's just crazy.
And we can't all get printing presses in our basement?
No, we'd be in jail. Now,
try to print one fake $1 bill and see how fast it takes the Secret Service to come to your house.
Or hold up a liquor store and walk out with $45-50.
Yeah,
you'll get 10 years in prison. But John Corzine, who $1.6 billion from MF Global, steals out of sacrosanct segregated accounts.
Well, he paid his little toss-up to Obama, so it was okay.
Yeah, right.
He was one of the top fundraisers for the second go-around in the fraudulent elections of 2012.
Well, what we're seeing, really, is the greatest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the elite oligarchy, if you will. This is what we're seeing right now take place. It is economic treason. I cannot think of any other way to describe it. And it's interesting, too, because part of this, remember the 2008 TARP?
No. You mean the first, with the threatened martial law?
Right.
They didn't pass it. Then you had the fiscal cliff, where they solved that, not by cutting what they needed to, but actually added revenue.
Oh, you've heard
spending revenue
before, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, we're involved in the largest, or we're victims of the largest financial crime in history.
Are we victims?
We're victims.
How so? We know what's going on.
Well,
are we slaves to money?
No. Of course not.
Can they take away our joy, our happiness, our soul, our eternity because our economy?
They're sure working on it, aren't they, folks? I mean, they're working on it.
That's the point. Yeah, they are working on it.
But look,
distracting you from what's important in your personal life. They're working on distracting you what's important, especially from your spiritual life.
Yes, but wait a second. They're making deals by proxy. So are we with the devil? I mean, this is truly demonic at its core, because we are in bondage based on the debt that we must repay. And don't forget, we know what is money, or what does money represent? Money represents one's toil, man hours. There's absolutely no way that this can be walked back, because we have been, our future earnings, our future man hours have been stolen from us. And not only that, imagine going to a bank and saying, I want you to raise my credit limit on my unsecured loan.
Yeah, I just deposited $10 into my checking account.
Well,
I want $1,000 worth of credit issued to me now. That's the fractional reserve banking.
Of course it is. Of course it is. But think about this. Now, this is something that everyone can relate to. Think about this. You go into a bank. You want your credit, your credit
risen. Your credit
limit. Okay, thank you. Yeah, credit limit risen, and the banker looks at you and says, do you have any property? Any more property since we last talked? No. Do you have any additional assets? No. You still have a car payment? Yes. You still have this and that? Yes. And so on. And they go down the list of things, and the banker says, well, there's nothing I can do. I can't really raise your credit limit. And the guy said, boy, you going in and you say, boy, this is really going to hurt my kids. They're going to go hungry, or they're going to be hungry. And the banker eyes get really wide and big smile on his face and says, oh, you have children. And you are the person applying for the credit limit increase says yes. And the banker gets a big smile on his face, and the next thing you see is the man's child signing the paper to raise the debt limit. So our children are being sold. All of their toils and time is and future earnings are being sold into slavery. This is how diabolical and how evil this is, and yet we are allowing this, or without a peep we're allowing this. And again, I was talking to an investigative friend of mine before the start of the show, talking about the gold, for example. Do you really think that that gold, there's gold that exists under the Fed in New York or Fort Knox? Do you really think that we've got gold?
It doesn't matter.
Well,
I mean, it might matter to the nations who we say we're holding it for.
Of course it matters to the extent that in a system that should be operated with integrity and honesty, which, of course, that went out the window with the creation of the Federal Reserve,
right,
and of income tax. But
people don't understand that they can abolish the Federal Reserve today. We would owe nothing. Well, there would be a problem with other countries, and we could deal with that after replacing the Federal Reserve back to the original Constitution monetary policy. But the Federal Reserve was just a mechanism, as you said earlier, for the most massive global theft in financial history.
Exactly. And one thing, too, I want to mention, because I'm writing about this as well. James Forrestal was the Secretary of the Navy back from 1947 to 49. I don't have my notes in front of me at the moment. He was the first Secretary of Defense, but he was the highest cabinet level member ever to commit suicide, reportedly committing suicide by jumping out of a window. He was hospitalized because they thought he was crazy. And I'm just trying to remember here where I was going. Oh, yes. It's interesting because I was getting involved in doing some research about, well, what was going on at the time. Of course, Forrestal, James Vincent Forrestal was, as I said, the Secretary of Defense, first Secretary of Defense. In 1949, he reportedly, well, he was working for Truman, and he had unfettered access to Truman. He had gone through a lot of meetings, shall we say, with Truman. He knew about the attack on Pearl Harbor. I mean, he had inquired about and had information about the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, even though that was before his tenure.
Yep.
And he was a very successful businessman in his own right. And you might have heard, folks, about James Forrestal in history class, perhaps, just kind of maybe as a footnote for things.
If you were homeschooled.
If you're homeschooled, right. But he got into, he lost a favor. He lost the favor of Harry Truman when he began asking questions about certain things. And one of the things he started asking questions about was, of course, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. And soon, all of a sudden, he was being marginalized. And remember, at that, or shortly before that time, I had mentioned about the representative from Pennsylvania, McFadden, who was marginalized, called crazy for talking ill about the Federal Reserve. See, you got to go back a little ways to really understand how devious and deviant these people were, and in some cases still are.
But every single politician who is elected and sitting in office right now knows the Federal Reserve, knows the power that is behind them, and knows that they are the true engine that runs this economy. Now, it's running the economy in the very wrong direction purposely, and they have the power to stop, and had the power to stop this for the last 100 years since its inception.
Right.
They refused to do it, and there are a number of speculative reasons why. A lot of people in the Congress, I heard, were getting checks from the Federal Reserve. They're allowed to insider trade also, which...
Wait, when you're that close to the Ponzi scheme or that close to the pyramid scheme, of course.
Even John Kennedy is speculated one of the reasons he was, if not the reason he was really assassinated, was his executive order to abolish the Federal Reserve.
Of course. People argue, and I've seen this on various anti-conspiratorial, so to speak, websites. People will argue, well, that never happened. The executive order was never implemented. It collected dust, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that might be true, but there were a lot of other dynamics taking place. But back to Forrestal, if you look at if you lay that template back then over people today, it's the same template, but they marginalized. And even today, if you look up Forrestal, for example, on Wikipedia, I'm guessing here, I'm sure he would be made to look like he was hospitalized for psychiatric reasons, and he was committed to a psychiatric hospital and jumped out the window. But folks, here's why I mentioned this, because to me, this was really interesting, and it kind of got me sidetracked a little bit. But talk about sidetracked. But what I found the most interesting is this: the investigation into him jumping out of the window in the hospital back in 1949. The investigative report the investigation that was done by the Navy was most of it. The majority of it was classified until 2004, okay, which was just, 9 years ago. Well, now parts of that report are online, as are parts of Forrestal's own diary. And the diary is on microfiche at Princeton, I believe, one of the libraries. but parts of it are online. So there were questions that he was raising about the International Monetary Fund and about certain aspects of the banking system and all of that whole time period. And he was saying, kind of like we're saying, wait a minute, things are wrong here. There's something very wrong. Well, for that he was called crazy, committed, and then supposedly the story is he jumped out the window. But if you look at the declassified report, it indicates that there was a struggle, or could have been a struggle, in his hospital room prior to him jumping out of the window. Yet no one made any reference to a struggle. And if you look at the actual report itself, it has pictures. The pictures show a room that was cleaned before it was declared a crime scene. That might not mean that to you. That might, maybe you're listening to this and saying, "Oh, so what?" No, see, the MO doesn't change, does it? The MO does not change.
No.
And I just want to say that we're looking at the same MO. We're looking at the same set of, even today. Look at Breitbart. Look at others as well. Okay.
Going back to the Bible quote I was telling you about earlier about the wisdom, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 18. For in much wisdom is much grief, and that he who increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. That was the quote I wanted you to, or I was referring to. Switching gears here, I sent you an email.
I got it.
I don't know, this was briefly mentioned last week. You guys, we talked about the Philip Marshall, who's a host on Coast to Coast, or a guest on Coast to Coast a lot, wrote a book about 9/11, and all of a sudden he turns up dead and his family murdered. They say he killed his family, his 2 kids, and their dog, his dog, and himself. Now, Press TV has come out with an article, CIA killed 9/11 author in Black Operations Hit. A former U.S. National Security Agency officer says the 9/11 investigative author, Philip Marshall, and his children and dog were killed in a black operations hit by the CIA, dismissing the suicide hypothesis. This is from a Wayne Madsen.
Right. Wayne Madsen is a contributor to Alex+Jones, to InfoWars.
Yeah, he does a lot. You talk about investigating Obama and the Down Low Club and the Chicago history. He has written extensively and done lots of research on that. But he goes on to say that Marshall was afraid of being silenced for his revelations about 9/11, Madsen said, noting that the side door of the investigator never used was wide open when his dead body was found at his house. Along with Marshall, 14-year-old Massilia and her 17-year-old brother Alex were also found dead. Madsen suggested that Marshall, who had observed many covert operations, had decided to shed light on mystery issues in the last year of his life. Marshall believed the former U.S. President George Bush had pulled off 9/11 attack to foment governmental coup. In his 4th book, he was supposed to disclose blockbuster information. Now, we know PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, involving Dick Cheney and many of the Bush administration members, as well as the policy thinking heads of international monetary and business corporations, were involved in. And they said this was the Project for the New American Century, and they couldn't bring it about unless there was a new Pearl Harbor-like event. That would be the only way to bring it about in a quicker manner. And put that along with his father talking about the New World Order coming to pass with 1,000 points of light, where the founder of the UN's vision could come into fruition and take over the world, blah, blah, blah. And Obama's mentioned the New World. Everybody, all these people who mentioned the New World Order. And I have a 13-minute video I downloaded last night, which basically goes through every single one of these people saying and talking about implementing a New World Order. Yet, if, according to the West Point and some new DHS documents, if you talk about it, well, you are crazy and deserve to be mentally, to say you should be disarmed of your weapons for mental reasons, and you are a terrorist. But anyway, back to these.
It's got the picture of Philip Marshall along with his 2 children, It's a very sad thing to look at.
And without proof, without more, I mean, the neighbors had come out and said this guy's not suicidal. They couldn't even envision him killing himself, let alone his family. And like you said, on Rick Loud's show, a big indicator. You don't shoot your dog.
You know, and I was taken to task for saying that, but I'll tell you one thing: every time I've looked at a suicide, for insurance, whether like especially a high value insurance type of a claim, to take a look to see whether it was a suicide or homicide, or to double check the police. I've never seen a case where the family pet, whether it was a dog or a cat or even a bird, there was one case that it was pretty clear that did take place, but one out of the numbers were astronomical. Just
like women, they don't hang themselves.
Well, no, they don't shoot themselves in the face.
Statistically.
In the face, they don't shoot themselves in the face,
or hang themselves.
Well,
there's like 97% or something like that. But we saw the D.C. madam and her friend both hung in what was a government, in my belief, a government.
Exactly.
Sanctioned killing.
Hey, she had a whole list of suspects in that little black book.
Yeah,
but
if she would have just came out with the information, like Breitbart would have just come out with the information when they said they had it, well, they could be in much different positions right now.
Well, yeah, but if you say, look, I'm not suicidal. I have no intention of committing suicide, and it shows the brazen nature of the people of the enemies that we face. Because I could sit up here and say I've got no intention of committing suicide whatsoever, and I could sign statements to that effect, and yet, somebody might find my dead body with a bullet hole in my head and a gun and say, yeah, they committed suicide. Well, or when anything but that would be true. And yet people still don't question it. And when you do question it, like you said, it's always, well, this is just so conspiratorial that we just can't even deal with it. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that that's always the case, where there's this this disparaging marginalization over people who question and isn't it sad too, where we have to question, or we find it necessary to question the official storyline.
No, it's not sad, because it's something, a practice we should have always never been taken away from. And I have a Bible verse from Ecclesiastes to back that up. But we, as the Founding Fathers said, you will not be able to maintain this government unless it is kept. The people are engaged. They know what is going on at all times, and they are aware of all the political issues. Well, obviously, we have been taken away from that. So what we see is what we get, which is what we have let happen through being distracted with earthly, material life as we've known it. But as we are learning, we learn too late sometimes. And
just remember this here. Just remember this statement. Again, this is from an investigative friend of mine. We get the government we work for, earn, and deserve. We get the government that we work for, earn, and deserve. And I think that's a very, very good. I think. Look, I got to tell you, I think that's exactly true. Right where we stand, we deserve the government that we have because of our inaction to date. What have we done to, either collectively or individually, what have we done to attempt to change 40, 50, 100 years, a generation or two generations of this type of activity? We have not done anything. How many people in the last month have had a gun rally in their area, or when I say gun rally, a Second Amendment rally in their area, and not attended, even though you don't have a gun, or you might not have a gun? And I'm not talking about the people that are impaired and physically, it would be a physical problem for them to attend. I'm talking about the people that went to the mall instead of the Second Amendment rally. If
they knew about the rally,
yes, but let's see if
they say on message boards, chat rooms, that they stand up for the Second Amendment. People who say, the like you say, the keyboard warriors, people who will, advocate one position or another, yet don't get off their butts to do anything about anything they're complaining about.
Exactly. So
part of that's conditioning.
Right.
Part of that is our own lack of understanding.
But see, Sun Tzu, if you read the book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and I recommend everyone, it's a short book. I recommend everyone grab themselves a copy of that book. Part of that is the psychological, as you mentioned, the psychological conditioning, where we are, the battle is won or lost before a shot is even fired. And a lot of this is that thought process, well, we can't fight City Hall. You've heard that statement repeated many times. You just can't fight City Hall, meaning you can't fight authority, whether it be municipal or state or even the federal government. You can't fight City Hall. That's a conditioning to get you not to fight. And of course you can fight City Hall. And of course you can make a difference, especially on the local level. And this is where we have to make the differences on the local level. Or at least we can start. But with respect to the larger topic about the economic situation, it's my belief that we're too far gone, that what we're going to have to do at this point is act with the appropriate anticipation, and wisdom is acting with anticipation in part to know, or to be intelligent enough to get out of the way of what's coming. The gentleman I speak to a lot says, stupid people can get you killed or will get you killed. We have to understand too what's coming, get out of the way of what's coming, be prepared for what's coming. At this point, help others to the best of our ability, but help ourselves develop that defensive posture, that defensive mechanism, and even a defensive community, if you will, to fight off what is coming. We can survive it, and not only can we survive it, we are ordained to survive it, because there are blessings for us that we will receive by living another day. That and are we appointed to engage in the fight? Some will be, some won't be. If you're, I believe it was Paul leaving Rome down the Appian Way and meeting Jesus on his way down the Appian Way, and Paul saying, well, "Where are you going?" To Jesus. And Jesus says, "I'm going to Rome to be crucified again." Of course, this is not in the corporal body, but differently, spiritually. Well, what did Paul do? Instead of fleeing Rome, he turned around and went back, and of course, he himself was killed after engaging in the battle in which he was ordained to engage in. So this is us, and I know that story is not necessarily 100% accurate the way I told it, but it was just condensed for that purpose, for the analogy that I gave.
All right, we're up against the break. I want you to open the studio. I don't know if you're going to be taking calls or not.
I've got the studio open here.
Okay, I'm going to be gone for this third hour. I'm going on a secret mission. I won't be back till Wednesday when we are joined by L.A. Marzulli, and I'm not going to say any more about that and what I'm doing. But I will miss you guys, and what I will be doing won't be as pleasant as being here with you, but anyway, I'm going to be taking off now. My dad's going to be taking over the last hour tonight and tomorrow, and treat him nicely if you can.
I don't know, man. I don't know if I deserve that, but Joe, thank you very much. And I mean, it's you just take care of yourself. Be careful.
I will do that, and we will obviously be in contact. I will be around, and we're going to go to break now. It's been great for the first 2 hours. I'm going to miss the third hour. I'm definitely going to miss tomorrow.
Oops, sorry about that. That was my fat finger there.
I'm wondering.
Yeah, I hit that.
Well, hit stop.
I did.
Okay.
There you go.
Because now we got the outro music playing. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report this Monday, March 4th, 2012. I guess open the phone lines. Give us a call, 661-244-9839. I'll let my dad handle all that. I'll see you Wednesday. Don't miss tomorrow, and don't stick around for the second hour. My dad will be right back.
That'll be the third hour, but thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, folks. Doug Hagmann here. You might know me as the co-host from the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, or as a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. If you're like me, you're tired and confused over today's headlines. You just don't know where to turn for accurate, concise information about really what's going on, what's truly going on in today's society. If you don't know where to turn for accurate, well-researched, and properly vetted news, I've got a suggestion. In fact, it's a requirement. Bookmark Canada Free Press. That's CanadaFreePress.com on the internet. It's just not for Canada. It's for news across the world. Judy McLeod, founding editor, has put together a vast array of talented writers like Kelly O'Connell, Daniel Greenfield, Dr. Eileen Johnson-Powell, a lot of guest columnists, very talented writers. Folks, that's Canada Free Press at CanadaFreePress.com. Now mobile friendly. Follow on Facebook, because without America, there is no free world.
If you're stumped, you don't know what kind of gift to give to a friend or a loved one, I'm telling you, you must go to 4physics.com. That's the numeral 4, PHYSICS.com. This is your one-stop shopping palace. That's the only way I can put it. I could spend easily an hour on this website. Innovative, fun, educational. There are games, books, weather instruments, unique time-telling devices, jewelry, optical devices, laboratory equipment. Let me give you an example. We all know we can tell time with a sundial. You've seen those advertised. Did you know that you could tell time by the stars? At 4physics.com, you can buy a horologium nocturnum. This was a navigational device used in the 15th century by navigators at night to tell time by the stars. It's beautifully crafted in the shape of a pendant made of bronze and pewter or gold and silver. Absolutely a stunning gift. I would be proud to give it to anyone. You must go to 4physics.com. Even if you're not stumped, that's 4physics. That's the numeral 4, PHYSICS.com. It's your one-stop shopping palace. Any problems that you have, I don't know what to get Grandpa, I don't know what to get my loved one, that's unique, you will find it at 4physics.com. Please take my word for it. Go to the website, but give yourself a lot of time because you're not going to want to leave. 4physics.com.
Doug Hagmann, one guy that doesn't need a bullhorn to get your attention.
You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Yeah, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 3 of the Hagmann Report for this, the 4th day of March, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, flying solo this hour, as Joe is off on a super secret mission that we can't talk about. He is being dispatched as we speak, and he'll be checking in with me. I'll be able to give you information about his status, but he'll be okay. Things will be okay without him. I'll be able to fly solo. The first 2 hours we spoke about a lot of things, a lot of headlines, and we have to use discernment as to what we are paying attention to, and of course, certain things. It's interesting. For example, the swarms of locusts descending on Cairo, and of course, this locust plague reaches Cairo after being seen along the coast of the Red Sea. I would suspect that Pastor Paul Begley talked about this, and but it's interesting how some people in the internet community have been talking about this. Some say, well, it's just it's just part. Things will happen. Things like this will happen. It's just a matter of. It's nothing new. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't read anything into it. Is that true? Is that really true, or is there something behind it? So in fact, somebody said, "Well, doesn't this happen every spring? Doesn't this happen every spring?" Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, folks. I just had to take care of some. Well, don't you love live radio? If I could read your writing, I would. I got you. All right, thank you. But once again, the question is, the issue is people are trying to minimize it, and there's this. Have you noticed, folks, that there's this huge, this very vocal opposition against making anything into or tying anything into Scripture. If you think for one moment that it's based in Scripture or biblically based or a sign or a harbinger or an omen, then you're nuts. I don't know about this one. I don't know. But again, this does deserve our attention. This does deserve the proper context in which we should look. Just like, as Joe said, the lightning against or lightning on the Vatican and what happened there, and the resignation of the Pope, the first time that's happened in almost 600 years. And by the way, folks, the Vatican, this brings me to another issue that I really feel strongly about, and I think it's a big part of the resignation of the Pope. And this is no way, by the way, Catholic bashing. The papacy, the Vatican, the people within the Vatican, these men do not represent the Catholics, the Catholic faith. That has nothing to do with your faith. If you're a Catholic, it has nothing to do with that. But remember what Father Malachi Martin had said many times on Coast to Coast, and had also talked about in Windswept House. I believe it was that book that he talked about the Vatican. Even Kathleen Keating, when I was on with her on the radio, talked about the compromising aspects of what was going on in the Vatican. Look, the Vatican Bank and the resignation of the Pope and of the Jesuits, their involvement in the Vatican, all of this is important. Think about this, too. The president of the Vatican Bank, I don't know how many people recall this, but last year, I believe it was in May, the president of the Vatican Bank, which is known, by the way, as the Institute for Works of Religion, was forced to resign after the board of directors of the bank issued a no-confidence vote. They voted unanimously to boot the president, to dismiss him, stating that his dismissal was needed to maintain the vitality of the bank and then search for a new director. But what does this have to do with... You see, the Vatican Bank, there's a huge money scandal there. There's a huge money scandal behind the Pope, behind the resignation of the Pope. To understand the Pope's resignation, follow the money. Folks, this is following the money. This is the key. You know, there are a lot of theories that the first Pope in 7 centuries resigned. There are a lot of theories about that. But finding the truth and this is one of the world's oldest corporations with the Vatican. The Vatican Bank is to follow the Vatican Bank money. There are obviously allegations of pedophilia and such behind Joseph Ratzinger's resignation, but that's just really the cover story. Nobody in the church hierarchy is really losing any sleep over their own standing. Canon law endorsed policy of concealing and protecting the perversion that exists there in that regard. But think back to 1978 when we had a pope that only reigned for 33 days. What was he investigating at the time of his death? Currently, some say what sounded really, what really made the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, what would happen here, was his personal involvement in the bribery and money laundering practices of the Vatican Bank. Once again, it's the IOR. It's known as the Institute of Religious Works. There was this huge and continues to be a very highly vicious anti-Ratzinger faction in the Cardinals, in the College of Cardinals. Now, there are damning documents that supposedly detail Ratzinger's secret rewarding of Vatican contracts to his friends, family members, kind of like the same graph we see in America. In a lot of political positions. And I don't mean to mean his position, that being the Pope, or the office or the seat of the papacy, as one of politics. But politics is indeed involved in that position. The Secretary of State and the real power behind the papacy, and we know him to be Cardinal Bertone, or Bertone, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He is the guy that engineered the sack of the head of the Vatican Bank in May of last year. Well, the head of the Vatican Bank back in May of 2012 had embraced the call of the European Parliament for greater transparency and was about to disclose to the international community, specifically Brussels, how the papacy, his bosses, had been laundering money for the mob for decades. The last pope who had tried such a disclosure, I mentioned earlier, was John Paul I, who reportedly died from poisoning in September of 1978 after holding that role of the Pope for less than a month. But even as the Vatican Bank president was silenced by his booting last May, the Vatican Bank House of Cards just kept on coming down as the European Parliament seized from it 30 million euros that were fraudulently acquired. Even the American Securities and Exchange Commission declared that the Vatican Bank's assets and practices were insecure. A major Vatican house cleaning was definitely required, or at least the appearance of one, and that is what we have seen just now. Bertone, the Secretary of State, represents the old Italian crowd, the mob government papal clique that run the country and the Roman Catholic Church at the highest levels. In other words, allegedly this comes from one of the Roman senators who stated that you must understand that in his country, the mafia, the government, the Vatican, they're all the same. And they only have one concern, protecting their assets. But see, what we're looking at here is something even bigger. Because if you start following the money with the Vatican Bank and understanding how big the Vatican Bank is, and the calls for a New World Order as well, or a new economic world order, and many other aspects. This is setting up a new one world banking order, new one world order in the economic faction. So to say that the resignation of the Pope Benedict XVI does not have its root in a new world order would be false. Now, we can go back to the prophecy of the popes attributed to Saint Malachi. Remember this, it's a list of 112 popes identified with their short phrases in Latin, which purport to describe each of the Catholic popes along with a few anti-popes. It began with Pope Celestine II, elected in 1143, and then it is to conclude with the next pope. But the prophecy of the popes calls this last pope Peter the Roman, and no one can really tell how this is going to end at this point. But it's going to be interesting to see who this next pope is. But according to the prophecy, this final pope is going to pontificate over the destruction of Rome. And it's interesting because we had Tom Horn on this program who said that Pope Benedict XVI would be gone in 2012 or 13 because the year was different. The calendar year that they were talking about was different, so it did extend in 2013. So Tom Horn was right on. So if we look at Petrus Romanus, in the words of Tom Horn and the writings of Chris Putnam and Tom Horn together, this is all coming together for setting the stage for this Antichrist system. And by the way, are we not seeing the banking system here in the United States and the banking system in the Eurozone? Are we not seeing the ties to London, LIBOR, that scandal, the square mile in London where the royal family, where all the royals are and all the elites and all the banking, all the power comes from? Can we not see this where the seat of economic power will likely be once the financial economic meltdown hits this year? It's going to be London. And if you want to take it one step further, you remember us talking, folks, about the Olympics, about the opening ceremonies of the Olympics and how really odd that whole thing was. It really wasn't about the Olympics. It wasn't about sports. It was just so out of place and everything. In fact, Nathan Leal talked about it, and a couple of our guests talked about it. You've talked about it. You've studied it, folks. You've looked at it. We've talked about it. You see, London is going to play an integral role in the ushering in of this global governance. And with the global governance comes this economic one world order. And as we talked about earlier, with that one world economic governance, so too will there be one world religion, a single religion that will kind of mitigate or dilute or eradicate. I'm not going to say eradicate, but it'll push Islam and Christianity and Judaism down. And so all of this is taking place all at the same time. So everything is linked. The economic meltdown is linked. The role of the Pope, the Vatican Bank, and the Vatican Bank is extremely wealthy. And the power that bank holds is kind of like a Goldman Sachs. And folks, think about Goldman Sachs. The power comes from the people, because how many Goldman Sachs people do we have running our government or the governments of the Eurozone? Quite a few, don't we? There's a lot of power in that organization, as there is a lot of power in the Vatican Bank. So, and also the Vatican Bank is under the purview of the Pope. So all of this ties together very neatly. Are we not seeing perhaps the chess pieces for the final end game scenario lined up here? I think we are. Look, I'm an investigator and I'm a linear thinker. 30 years of just pounding it into my head. You think a certain way. You're told to think a certain way. You're told to act a certain way. And you look at the evidence. In this case, folks, look, I truly believe, and I had to arrive here kicking and screaming against my will, but I truly believe that we're seeing the end game play out. I don't have any other answer for it. I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go to the phones. We're going to take a couple of calls very quickly. If you can, I ask that you make your point real quick, and we can have a nice discussion, and we will go from there. I'm going to take 303. You're on with Doug Hagmann.
Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you, Doug?
Very well. You're on. What's up?
Things just keep rapidly increasing. I mean, all we have to do is take a look at the news for sinkholes or locusts. Again, we need to put our nose right into the scriptures and get real with God.
Well, yeah, I think anyone who can't see the obvious, I mean, locusts, all of these things taking place, I agree. We've got to get right with God. But at the same time, and as my investigator friend said too, we've got to be smart enough to get out of the way of what's coming, to position ourselves to kind of get out of the way of what's coming, period, so we can live to engage in a battle in another day, because that, of course, bestows blessings upon us if we are able to survive, or if we survive to another day. Now, some people won't have that luxury, but those who do should. But yes.
Yeah, for all the listeners out there that don't know how to start getting prepared, I've heard you give some really good suggestions. Every time you go to the grocery store, buy a couple extra cans of beans and rice and things like that. But you can also go as simple as going on Craigslist. Everybody's got Craigslist, and you can go into the farm and garden. And a lot of times you'll be able to buy bulk animal feed that's the same as, the food we'd eat. And I mean, I would suggest you look for the organic stuff, but you could pay pennies per pound for that. And in worst case scenario, you will survive. Who needs gourmet food? We just need to keep the calories in our body to survive. On top of that, there's all sorts of bulk, consignment stores that sell to restaurants. And again, they're opening their doors to the public, so you can get larger bags of rice, larger bags of beans, and that will help you and your family. And again, those that aren't prepared, you don't want them beating down your door for what you have. So again, pick up those extra things and the cheaper stuff so you can help other people. It's what Christ would do.
Very good. Very good information, and I agree. And I thank you very much for your call.
Thank you.
God bless you. All right, man.
God bless you.
That's true, isn't it? We can prepare right now. We know it's coming. We know that our dollar has been devalued. And, folks, since 1913, we've had a 97% devaluation of our dollar since the Fed created this fiat, or since the Congress created the Fed, which created the fiat currency. Our dollar has been devalued by 97%. Don't fall for the fictitious everything is fine scenario. Make your preparations as you can. If you're in if I was in, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if I was in the stock market, I would get the heck out as soon as possible. Why? Because what are we seeing with the stock market? What's holding the stock market up? They're high-frequency trades. They're trades by computers, by and between computers. There is no human interaction, or very little human interaction there currently. It's all high-frequency trades. And, it's all the HFTs, high-frequency trade, and algos. It's all done by computer, and that's what's taking place. So get out. If I had money in there that I needed to put elsewhere, I would definitely put it in precious metals. I would put it in food, and I would put it in something to defend myself with, that being guns and ammunition, if you don't have those already. And if you don't have those already, I would definitely work towards getting them. More laws now are being made. Various states are making laws to restrict gun possession. And don't forget, and I just want to say this: if I were to be asked to register, if I lived in a state that required gun registration, I would not comply. Now, I'm saying that for me. If I owned a gun and I lived in a state where that state required registration, I would not comply. Because historically, every single time that we've experienced gun registration, we've seen confiscation to follow. So why set yourself up for that? Does that mean that I would accept being a felon or the possibility of me being a felon? Absolutely. Because I would much rather fight the fight constitutionally, although one can argue that there is no constitution at this point to fight. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm not going to give up my right to bear arms for a state law. I'm just not going to do that. That's just me. But folks, you're going to have to make that decision when it comes to you. I would not comply. And I would urge everyone not to comply. I was talking with, and we're going to have Attorney Billy Bear on. I don't know, some of you folks might have heard Billy Bear. He's along with Dan Haggerty from the Bear Haggerty Offensive, a powerhouse station out of Philadelphia. Billy Bear went to the New Jersey Council session, the New Jersey State Assembly session last month, where there were 400 people there, and they were going to vote on this gun registration /ban /confiscation bill, whatever you want to call it, and they were going to do so without taking any type of constituent comments. Well, finally they acquiesced and said, okay, we'll take your comments, but the bottom line was this: there were at least 400 very, very resolute individuals there saying, we are not going to comply, we're not going to submit. And there's a YouTube channel, in fact, I'll have it up on my website tomorrow, a YouTube channel that Billy Bear has that captured the indignation by the attendees. But even more, I suppose what struck me even more than that was the talking down by the assemblyman to the people that were there, the rudeness. In fact, the one clip I saw, a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, I believe it was, had gone up, addressed, it might not have been, it was a priest, a man of the cloth, had gone up and to address the assembly and said, look, this is not how things are done, and don't forget the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. The way that this assembly treated this man of God, was eye-opening. And we'll have Billy Bear on to talk about this. But folks, I mean, things are happening quickly. Let's go back to the phones here. We're going to take 903. 903, you're up with Doug Hagmann. What's on your mind?
One second, Doug. Let me get you off speaker here. Okay. My thought on that is I run a news feed. I called you guys last a couple days ago here, and my thought is that you need to really look at the trends, because you got to remember that so much of this news now is so pumped full of NGOs, propaganda, psyops groups, all this stuff. You need to look at the whole thing, and you got to remember it's the whole Eye of Sauron thing, right? They're trying to get everybody to focus on this really, really unimportant thing, the saber rattling and that sort of thing, and keep you away from the really important thing that they're trying to actually accomplish.
What do you, in your estimation right now, what should we be looking at?
Well, I think what you really need to be seeing right now is the grand scale persecution that is occurring. The Christians are becoming immediately into the crosshairs. I can see this. I subscribe to over 100 different feeds. Like I said, I run my own news feed myself, and you just see the increased how would you put it? The fervor of the opposition, almost a taunting of the Christians worldwide. And the persecution worldwide is just becoming off the chain. It's just really crazy how morality and, the other religions are just radicalizing and just setting their sights on Christians.
No, I totally agree with you on this. It seems like America, in particular, is slow to respond to this war against Christians. Are you seeing that, or is this just what am I biased in this?
Oh no, absolutely not. If you're subscribing to the American news, you have no idea. Get out of the American news. Even if they're co-opted, BBC, Russia Today, Dabka File, there's a whole laundry list of news agencies that are outside the U.S. that'll give you a better scoop of what's actually going on. But the beheadings, just put beheadings into YouTube and take a look around. It's absolutely astounding right now. And the news that's actually being reported is just so disinformation-based, because you'll hear about rebels. No, these are not rebels. These are Muslims. These are Muslims that are attacking India. These are Muslims that are attacking the coast, the bordering of Russia and China. These are Muslims that are completely obliterating Africa right now. And it is what it is. On my feed, I actually have I put a heading for peaceful religion. This is not a peaceful religion. This is Islam means submission. Well, it means submission to me with a sword.
Of course. Yeah, caller, let me ask you a question. And folks that are listening to this, let me ask you a question as well. Think back just 20 years ago, 20 years ago. When is the last time, prior to 9/11, or even a year or two after that, when was the last time you heard or read about a beheading or beheadings? It was almost non-existent, wasn't it? It wasn't because of a news blackout prior to. Well, I'll say before. We'll say before like 1998. You didn't hear about that. It was only with the rise of Islam and the spread of that, and even down into Mexico, South America, up into Central America, and into Mexico. We're seeing beheadings in Mexico en masse.
So we seen beheadings in New Jersey last week, I believe it was.
Well, of course.
Canada is being inundated with honor killings. Look at the UK. It's absolutely. They passed Sharia last year. It was. This is a planned rollout globally.
You're exactly right.
That is absolutely being is being instigated. MI6 and the CIA created the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda. So this is being allowed to happen, and as they continue to keep winning for what it's worth, they will radicalize people that were regularly on the bench. And my question is, when are Christians going to radicalize? When are we going to realize that we are being invaded in America? Not necessarily just by the Muslims. I'm talking about even more morally. There's a culture push on Americans too. And the fact is that we are responsible as Christians to uphold and to stand up and fight evil for what it's worth.
Right.
And you just see this grand scale apathy that is I just don't even quite understand.
Well, The only reservation I have would be I wouldn't say Christians radicalizing. I would say Christians waking up to the threat, and then getting together, grouping together and defending their faith and defending their beliefs. It's not a radicalization to do that. It's more of a matter of self-preservation. But I think you're absolutely correct in that. At what point? See, Christians have rolled over for birth control in this country. They've rolled over for abortions in this country. They've rolled over for how many other things? What's the Christians' red line in the sand going to be when there are actually beheadings and oppression taking place? By that time, it's going to be too late to form any type of defensive posture or even an offensive position. That's kind of what I believe.
Oh, I know, I did a podcast. I was the guy with the podcast that did, a podcast for a year and some change. And you know what I seen? I go to a permaculture conference. I was the only Christian. I go to a preparedness, get together or whatever, and I was the only Christian. I was on the radio. I was the only Christian. And I'm like, wait a minute, where did we miss out here, Christians? Why did we allow the enemy to put a noose around our neck with credit and our slide of morality? What I mean by radicalizing is actually going by what the Bible says. For some reason, we've missed sustainability, the independence of a Christian to make sure that we can do what God wants us to do, one, and just to flat leave what the Bible teaches. It's somehow okay in American Christianity for us to just kind of allow whatever to happen in our churches, in our parishes, wherever we congregate. It's just, we've just abandoned God, and then we shake our head and wonder why we're in judgment.
Exactly, and that must change. We must put up opposition to this. We must, and there's nothing, there's nothing anti-Christian about standing up and defending your faith. There's absolutely nothing anti-Christian about that. Anything else before I cut you loose?
I would just say that sustainability, Christians, is not an option. It is absolutely an eventuality. We are in the crosshairs. We are going to start seeing persecution, which means job loss, which means, just people flat persecuting you, turning you in, see something, say something. We must get down making our own food, getting together with other fellow Christians that do believe in the Bible. We must become the remnant. And thank you, Doug, for your great work, man. I appreciate you.
All right, my friend. God bless. Thank you very much for that call. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and folks, we have to understand. We've got to understand. We've got to absolutely understand that it's a matter of survival. That Christians have to stand up and say, look at what Ann Barnhart said, for better or worse, what she had done. Ann Barnhart, the former commodities broker, she's got a relatively popular website. She did a very nice series on the economic collapse, the pending economic collapse. We've had her on our program before as a guest. But she stood up and said she's not paying one more dime in taxes. That's her line in the sand. Not one more dime. She's not going to fund abortions. She's not going to participate in the Ponzi scheme. She's not going to do it. And, she said people have to take a stand. This is where she's taking her stand. So there's nothing wrong with taking a stand. In fact, I believe it's biblically mandated. That's my belief. It's biblically mandated. 716, we're going to you. You're live with Doug Hagmann.
Yeah, hi, Joe and Doug.
Hey, my friend.
I've been listening to a few people talk about, when it comes time when things begin to break loose here as far as a social collapse, about helping your neighbors and joining together with them. But you know what? If we're going to believe that God is bringing people under judgment, you're going to help the people that God is judging. You got to watch who you're going to be talking to and inviting in your house. When trouble happens, I want people to be around people who want to cry out to God. I don't want to be around people who are going to be cursing God.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of a given. I mean, you're going to have to use your discernment, your God-given discernment, to pick these people out. And you know what, caller? I believe that people have that inner voice, the Holy Spirit, if you will. Some people like to say that inner voice, that inherent ability to weed people out that don't belong, or not to approach them in the beginning. Don't you think that'd be the case?
Yeah, I believe that 100%. I mean, I remember the story when Groover told about Hamburg, about the two people that were in Spirit-filled Pentecostal churches, and they got a living word from God, and they most of them didn't really move to that word, and then finally a few did, and said the fire got so bad from the bombing of Hamburg. You know what? You can't read Hamburg in the Bible. You got to get a living word from the Holy Spirit.
That's right. No, you're 100% accurate. But I think now is the time when we have to start forming our, I don't know, coalitions or our inner circle of people that we can trust, even if it's 4, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Because we're not going to, ideally, we need to do this. Going through this alone, I suppose you can do it. But boy, it would be a lot better if you had a few like-minded people around you.
I mean, really, I have one good friend and a believer, but we have a little church group at our house that we get together. But really, we've been, kind of trying to, stock up on some food and doing the basic things we need to hopefully make it through the other side of this thing when it does show up. But you know what? You're almost afraid to approach most people about this subject because none of them take it serious. But you know what? They're going to take it. If you can't believe God to take your headache away, what are you going to believe God for when the trouble happens?
Well, that's a great statement. That's a great statement. That's right. If you don't believe on the little things, you're not going to be able to, or you won't have a tendency to believe on the big things. So, you're going to have to, I mean, your faith is going to be put to the test. But, I'm glad to hear that you are preparing. You and others are preparing.
You know what? I mean, it's 100% true, and the truth in it is, you have to discern, because your situation where you're at is going to be possibly a little different than mine. Your neighbors are different than mine. The situation is different. Where I live is slightly different. We're going to definitely have to follow and get a word from the Holy Spirit and hopefully be tuned in enough to receive, from the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's going to be crucial in this time.
You're going to be told when to move out of the way. You're going to be told when to duck. You're going to be told when to stand. I believe that to be the case, not by necessarily a voice out of the sky, but perhaps by a voice from within. And I think that we have to.
That's right.
We have to really pay attention to that. Anything else before we cut you loose?
Oh, that was about it. Just concerned that some people giving advice about, rounding all your neighbors up. I mean, I could probably think, people that signed the Declaration of Independence weren't all believers. They were patriots. There's patriots, there's believers. There's Christians, there's non-Christians. Believers, non-believers. And I don't want to unify with an unbeliever in times of crisis.
That's a very important distinction.
I'm not, pushing them away, but if I'm led, I mean, you give a can of food to somebody, they might tell 20 other people. And like the guy in New Jersey had food piled up. In 2 days, it was all gone. He was out in the street begging for food.
Right, exactly. And it's that discernment. And see the distinction you made between believers and, shall we say, patriots or constitutionalists or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
That spiritual element has to exist. That element of belief, that theology, that has to exist. Otherwise, you're endangering yourself and everyone around you. So you're absolutely right.
Well, I bless you guys. I enjoy your show. Have a good night.
All right, my friend. God bless you, man.
Bye.
Folks, that's a very, very good. That's very good advice, isn't it? I mean, we can talk to our neighbors, and you know who they are. You've got to listen to that voice inside of you. It's called survival. All right, let's take another call. Let's go to 828 area code. You're on with Doug Hagmann.
Hi, Hagmann and Hagmann.
How you doing? You sound very chipper tonight.
Oh, thank you. I just want to play the devil's advocate here, no pun intended. I've heard several people say this as of late, and I've kind of given it thought. But with all of the events that we're seeing, all these convergences and, all of these dates being set for Obama going to Israel before Passover, do you possibly think that maybe the people that are pulling all of the strings, like the Illuminati, are purposely trying to deceive us and setting all of this up like it's a false counterfeit?
Yeah, I know what you're asking, and I'd like everyone that's listening to this to ask themselves that question too, because what you bring up is a very legitimate question. I believe that the power structure, the demonic, satanic, Luciferian power structure behind this, has got a limited window of opportunity in the form of Obama, in the form or in this time period. 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago, maybe we could have recognized that as perhaps maybe like a setup. I don't know, but yeah. I think
I've thought of that too.
No, go ahead.
No, that was my thought. At first when people brought that up, I said no, there's just too much going on, that I've discerned that I've thought the Lord over in prayer, and I feel like He's confirmed to me a lot of things. Like we can't all be deceived here. Everything that's going on. But it has been brought up, and I just I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, in this age of deceit, anything is possible. All right, but I believe that the timing is so short now. The convergence and confluence of events is so obvious that I do believe that we're seeing the real thing. And I'll go back to the London Olympics to make the case that they during the London Olympics were actually it was an incantation, if you will, but it was also a picture into what they are planning or what their plans are. And then you take the very historic 600-year event of the Pope leaving, resigning, and then you've got all the other stuff.
Yeah, right there. That kind of breaks the mold, because it's so old. Well, they say that part of it was tampered with, and it's the latter part that's more, relevant. That however it came about, it still seems to be pretty accurate. The prophecy of the Pope,
Right, and I got to admit, I was rather, when 2012 ended without Pope Benedict resigning or passing away or something happening, I have to admit I was wondering a little bit about the veracity of, we'll say the veracity of the prophecy of the popes and the veracity of even some of the information that Tom Horn and Chris Putnam had put together. I was thinking, now wait a minute, we didn't see that in 2012, so maybe there's some maybe this isn't what we think it is. But then that really sealed the deal for me. And then, of course, 2 lightning strikes, and now we got locusts. So,
that is true. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, that's kind of my answer to that. So
when the ground opened up and everyone got swallowed up, it's just astonishing. Anyway, well, thanks for your input on that, and I just wanted to
Well, thank you.
You thought about
thanks
that.
For the,
okay. Thanks. God bless.
All right. God bless you. Yeah, interesting question. Are we being set up? Are we, could this be a setup? No, I don't think so. Folks, do you think so? I don't think. I don't think we are. All right, let's go. Let's take one more phone call before the end of the show. We're going to go to area code 269. That's area code 269. You're on with Doug Hagmann.
Yes, Mr. Hagmann. My name is Raymond.
Yes, sir. Raymond.
Yeah.
How are you?
First time caller on anything like this. Your guest a while back was talking about beheading and news feeds and supreme misdirection as far as what the media gets us to pay attention to. A while back in like 1993, there was a thing passed called House Joint Resolution 104. Are you familiar with it?
Not by number. What are we talking here?
The 7 no-hide Education Day and the 7 no-hide laws. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with no-hide laws, but I'm not familiar with that particular resolution. Tell us about it.
Well, it's very deceptive in the way it's worded, and it's on the surface when you read it, it looks as though it's a tribute to a rabbi, and it has to do with the 7 no-hide laws. Well, when you get further into it, it is actually steering our legal system to instead of the 10 Commandments and the Code of Hammurabi and the rest, it's steering it to the 7 no-hide laws and making it the supreme law of the land, if you research it. And it's also been passed in the UN.
All right. I know which, okay. You mentioned, this has to do, correct me if I'm wrong, this has to do with the, confessing that Jesus is the Messiah, and if you do so, you are subjected to beheading, right?
Yes. And if you go on to read a bunch of the interpretations, most offenses in the common day, they seem to enjoy beheading for all forms of violation of the laws, much like the Muslims do in Sharia law.
Okay, now I've talked with people in Israel. I've talked with the Jewish leaders here in this country. One being Rabbi Bart Zadok and some other very high-profile Jewish leaders who have said, no, this is not what this particular law states. Now, or what the intent of this, or the actual practicality of this. For example, the 7 no-hide laws do not. It's how can I say this? It's no-hide laws are not consistent with what you're talking about with this particular piece of this resolution. Now, do you have information to the contrary, or because I'm. I don't want to dispel what you're saying without the, just on the. Do you have any other?
I just came on this a week ago, and I just wondered if you heard of it, or any of your listeners have heard of it, and was bringing it to your attention, maybe, because I've never heard anybody in our sphere of Christendom talk about anything like this, and it was quite alarming when I first read it.
Right, and now that you had mentioned it it took me a while. I don't know it by that resolution, and I'm not even sure if it was. I know it was from. If you go back, and I don't have any notes in front of me about this, but I believe this was raised back in like the 1970s. You seem to be more up on this than I am, but. If this is what I'm talking about, the no-hide laws and the decapitation for mentioning Jesus as a savior, and this is a Zionistic type of thing, okay, this kind of has its roots back in the 70s, maybe, where there was a lot of discussion about the Talmud, for example. Okay, all right. That's what. So I'm on the right track here.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of misinformation about this, because the no-hide laws, the 7 no-hide laws, are supposed to apply to righteous Gentiles in the sphere of Judaism. All right, for example, I don't know whether you're familiar with the 7 no-hide laws, you don't cut your beard and that type of thing. The 7 no-hide laws as opposed to the Jewish 617 commandments they've got to follow. It was a matter of coexistence between the Gentiles and the Jews. That was the only thing that I'm familiar with about this. So I would approach this with a certain amount of caution, and I'll research this more. In fact, I'll contact a couple of people I know who are very up on no-hide laws in the Talmud and discuss this. But I'd be very careful with this.
Okay.
Believing this, but that's just my viewpoint at this point.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, man. Thanks for calling. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
All right. Yeah, and folks, I didn't mean to sound, like I was, skirting the issue. Boy, there's so many things to be aware of, but I am familiar with. I've got friends in Israel, and we talk about the Talmud, and we talk about no-hide laws, which are for righteous Gentiles, especially for Gentiles living in Israel, and I've never seen it in any reputable or verifiable venue associated with beheading or decapitation as a punishment for violating this. In fact, I've never seen the no-hide laws demand or prohibit the confession that Jesus is the Messiah. So I'll have to look up the resolution that I wrote it down here that he mentioned, but that's that. So very interesting. There's just a lot out there, isn't there? A lot of information out there. Now, I was going to close out the show just kind of on a different note here. I just want to revisit just very quickly the DHS purchases of 2,700 mine-resistant armored vehicles, their MRAPs, to go with the 1.6 billion bullet stockpile and drones. I think it was a Gateway Pundit had something on it recently over the weekend. According to one estimate since last year, DHS has stockpiled more than 1.6 billion bullets, 40 caliber, 9 millimeter. But other reports have it up to twice that amount. Now, of course, MRAPs. I just wanted to just make sure everyone doesn't take this out of context, but put it into context. And the context in which it should be put in is the state of our economy and the planned orchestrated collapse of our economy. Because when everything does collapse, you're going to have, in 72 hours, the city's in flames. I really believe that. So the dots that we're seeing, don't look at them as little random pieces of news here and there. Let's step back and let's look at the bigger picture. Let's look at what is being planned for us. And especially let's look at what's being planned for us who are Christians or who are believers. Because I think all of this is going to come into play in a very short period of time. Very short. So prepare now, folks. And tonight, hit your knees tonight. Repent and say a prayer. Say a prayer for our country, for your family, your health, but repent above all. Until tomorrow night. Now tomorrow night I'll be flying solo. Joe is going to be taking care of some business tomorrow night. Wednesday, L.A. Marzulli will have as a guest. And I got to tell you, lining up somebody for either the end of the week or next week, you won't believe who this person is. Until tomorrow, good night and God bless.